I have to honestly wonder what would have happened if I'd have gone to talk for those 5 minutes. I'm kind of concerned, since they do know where I work, but if either of them try a thing, the cops will actually nail them. It was a terrifying weekend. When I was 11, I had a steady babysitter named Jane. My brother and sister were 17 and 18, so they were either too cool to babysit me or too busy with school around this time. Jane was their age, but I didn't think that her family had a lot of money. So she would babysit me almost every weekend instead of doing normal teenager stuff. My family lived in a pretty well-to-do cul-de-sac in the back of a large neighborhood. It was one of those neighborhoods where the houses got nicer the further back you went. The houses at the front of the main road were not as nice, but still not terrible or anything. And this is where Jane lived. Since I was 11 and prepubescent, I was a huge pain in the ass. But not to Jane. I looked at her as a best friend. We did so many fun things together, and I could truly tell that Jane loved me. One Saturday night, my mum was making plans for next week, but for the first time, Jane couldn't babysit. She had her first prom, and she was excited because the boy she had a crush on for years had asked her. I knew this because she had been telling me about him since before she started high school. My mother and I were both very excited for her, and I saw my mum hand her way more money than usual. Jane's eyes teared up, and she both gave us a huge hug. And left. Since this was the mid-90s, everyone got their babysitters from word of mouth. My mother heard from another mother that a girl that used to babysit for her kids had just moved back to her parents' house after grad school. She lived down the street from Jane, and her name was Becky, and my mum called her up to see if she could babysit me this Saturday. Becky excitedly said yes, and proceeded to ask my mum somewhat strange but not entirely alarming questions. How tall I was, what I looked like, etc. There must have been other questions, but I was just hearing my mother's side of the conversation. When she hung up the phone, my mother said to my dad, "Wow, she sure is thorough." I was a little nervous as Jane had been the only one to babysit me for years. In the rare instances that she couldn't do it, my parents usually just cancelled their plans. But this was a work party, and my dad was being honoured, so that wasn't an option. A couple of days before Becky was to come, I begged my mother to call Jane. I wanted to see if I could come over the night of prom to see her dress. My mum kept telling me that she wouldn't want me there, and that I could see pictures, but I insisted. So my mother called Jane and handed me the phone. "Hey there, May, how are you?" "I'm good. I wanted to see if I could come over on Saturday and see your prom dress." "Of course. I'm getting my hair done, but you can come after that. Maybe around 5:30? Tell your mum to call first though, just to make sure I'm home." "It won't be my mum," I reply. "It'll be Becky." Dead silence. "Wait, what?" "Since you couldn't watch me, my mum found a girl named Becky to do it." There was a long pause. "Okay, sweetie, that's fine." She hurriedly got off the phone. I went to school the next day and came home to my mum hanging up the phone, shaking her head. Poor Jane. Her date doesn't want to take her anymore. They had a fight. She wanted to know if she could still come watch you on Saturday. I feel bad cancelling on Becky, but it's completely up to you. Of course I chose Jane, and as usual, we had tons of fun. I didn't bring up prom because I didn't want her to make her feel sad. But when she asked me if I wanted to play dress up, we did each other's hair, put on my mum's dresses and took pictures with my mother's Polaroid. It was the best night of an 11-year-old's life. Jane went to community college, and by the time she went to a 4-year school, I no longer needed a babysitter. We kept in touch a little after that, but before long, we both got busy and lost touch. This is where the story ended, until this past weekend. I ran into Jane at a bar. She was not sober. In fact, she was very drunk. She didn't seem to be doing well. She was very thin and looked like she had track marks on her arms. This made me extremely sad, because she's one of the people who I loved most in the world, at least at one time. I sat next to her at the bar and asked her how she was doing. Her face lit up and she gave me a big hug. I always knew you would do well for yourself. Look at you, you're all grown up and beautiful. You look great too, Jane. No, I don't, but it's okay. We started talking and she was drinking even more. I got the feeling that she was in blackout territory. She was with a group of people that seemed to be her friends, so I wasn't entirely worried for her, but I still didn't want to leave her for some reason. She seemed really happy to see me. We started reminiscing at once, and it was my turn to bring up a story, and I said, "Remember when that dirtbag stood you up for prom? So we staged our own prom with pictures and everything. That was truly one of the best nights of my life." She looked at me through foggy eyes and smiled a thin smile. He didn't stand me up. The replacement babysitter was a sick woman. When I was little, she beat me, sexually abused me, threatened me, and locked me in closets. Then she would invite her boyfriend over to do the same thing to me. She told me if I ever told anyone, she would kill my family and that I would have to live in an orphanage. She took pictures of me too. I had repressed it until you said her name that day. Now it's all back, all of it. I should have told someone, but it's too late now. I just didn't want people to know what had happened to me. I thought they would look at me differently. I regret so much. Who else knows what she did? She set down her drink and gave me a hug and a "good to see you," like she hadn't just dropped a major bomb on me, and she stumbled out with her boyfriend. Everything came flooding back to me. The phone conversation with Becky, with all the details. Jane's silence since when I said Becky's name. How Jane stayed with me every single weekend until I was old enough not to need a babysitter. Some people might say Jane should have told someone, but she was just a kid. But she was an extraordinary kid. She gave up her prom to save me. She gave up every single weekend after that, so that nothing would ever happen to me. She was my guardian angel. Unfortunately, Jane didn't have her own Jane, and it makes me feel horrible. So Becky, let's not meet. And if we do, I might just rip your throat out for changing the life of the most extraordinary person I have ever known. This happened a few months back. I work for the emergency services. This happened a few months back. We get the first call around 10 a.m. I asked the medic what the call was, and he says it was a 44. I asked him what that was since I hadn't heard of it before, and he says that the guy had shot himself with a 44. I wasn't sure if I should believe him since he bullshits sometimes. We get to the scene and the police are already there. The 2 officers and some volunteers are waiting by the door. I walk into the house and instantly something didn't smell right. I look around and notice the guy is a hoarder. I think maybe it's something thrown around that smells. We continue to the bedroom, and there's a guy lying face down, head between his nightstand and his bed. It smells pretty bad. He had a gash on his head from where he hit his head and fell, and I'm guessing hit the nightstand. He was 60 years old and pretty unhealthy. The other medics and police said he probably didn't die right away. The guy had been dead for about a week, and he was starting to decompose. He had maggots on him, and his skin was wet to the touch, with bubbles of water deposits on the outer layers of skin. They made us check for a pulse, so we hooked him up to our monitor, and surprise, surprise, he had no pulse. Like, really, how dead can he be? The smell was similar to a dead animal smell, but it lingered, and I would occasionally smell it throughout the day. On my way home, I passed a dead animal, and since I was on my Jeep with no top, I got the smell pretty hard, and I almost puked. I grew up in an odd family. We had a lot of odd families as friends, so it seemed semi-normal. There were 6 children, my mother and father, and I was the 5th, and I lived a fairly normal life. We went to church every Wednesday and Sunday. Southern Baptist. Kind of overly religious, but whatever. It was still social enough. When I was entering 2nd grade, my mum pulled me and my 2 brothers closest to me out of school and began homeschooling us. All of this is mediocre, sure, and just kind of odd. My 2 elder sisters both got married at 19 and started immediately having babies. And my mum and dad signed to let one of my brothers get married at 17. Little odd, but okay. Fast forward a few years, we leave the Baptist church to go to a spin-off because the lead pastors got into a fight and we followed the more eccentric one. Things started getting weird when they were teaching the book of Revelations. The pastor started preaching that the end of the world is healing, and that we were the only true Christians in the whole world. My parents moved us to a rural town and prepared us for the end. My dad, a nurse, stopped believing in doctors, and my sisters continued with their families, and we lost a lot of contact. Of course, the end didn't happen. My older brother and I got jobs at fast food restaurants, and he would sometimes work until 4 or 5 in the morning, and was expected to show up at 8 a.m. Mass for the 4 to 6 hour sermons 3 times a week, and return to work that evening at 4 or 5 and get kicked to the streets when he didn't show. We weren't allowed to see him. My other brother broke his wrist, and instead of going to the hospital, we just went to the pastor because he had all the healing powers. My parents had to ask the pastor before they did anything, including meaningless things like if they should call their children. My grandma was brought to our neighborhood and isolated until she died because of lack of care, because Jesus would heal her if she only believed. My elder siblings seemed to live a normal life, families, jobs, friends, and I started noticing that this church was a little whack when I was around 16, and started telling my older sister about it, just telling her what was happening. How I repeatedly got called to repent for all my sins in front of everyone, and how we were no longer allowed to associate with the brother who was kicked out. Not to mention the fact that he was damned to eternal hell because he was blasphemous to the Holy Ghost, who happened to be the pastor. When my sister got pregnant with her 4th child, who we found out had a lot of medical issues, obviously my parents ignored it, until one day I was sad and told my mother about it, and she suggested that we call the pastor to ask forgiveness for all my sins, because obviously that's why I was sad. I said okay. We called, and not even 3 minutes into the conversation, he yelled at me, stating that I was the entire reason for my nephew's problems, that babies aren't born that way unless someone has committed a terrible sin. I cried for a very long time, and the next day I called my sister when I was alone and I told her. She had no idea how to deal. Her baby was potentially dying and being blamed on her 17-year-old sister. Since leaving, my parents won't see me or allow me to see my little brother, and if I call, just to ask a simple question, I'm redirected to Jesus or the pastor for the answer. It's terrible. I use Tinder pretty frequently, and it's usually cool. Just meeting people, chilling, smoking with most of them, and so I match with this dude named Charlie, and he seems pretty cool. He's really cute, and he plays music which is really appealing to me, as I also sing and play piano. We talk for a little while, and I agree to meet him at his house. Mistake number 1. Why did I think it was a good idea to meet a stranger in their home? I don't drive, so I take an Uber over, and it's a decent way away, so it's kind of pricey. When he buzzes me into the apartment complex, I got this really creepy vibe, but I just shook it off as nerves. I go up to the 3rd floor, and he's standing at the door. Things are cool, we're just chilling, we smoke a couple of bowls, and we're watching a movie. And he makes a move on me and I go with it. We end up on his bed, and we're obviously engaging in adult activities when out of nowhere, he wraps his hands around my neck hard. Now, that's all fine and good with me. I mean, I can dig that in the right setting, but alone at a stranger's house, when he didn't even check to see if it was cool, that's too much. So I literally can't breathe, and I'm fairly certain my face is turning blue at this point, and the look in his eyes is relentless. Not only is he asphyxiating me, he's yelling in my face, "Are you scared?" with this wild look in his eye. And yes, I am absolutely terrified you're going to kill me. I start to struggle, and he was gripping even harder. And I'm not kidding you. I seriously thought I was going to die. By some kind of miracle, I wriggle out of his grasp and start screaming. He's yelling at me to calm down, and I'm frantically trying to get my clothes back on. He grabs my wrist as I'm trying to leave, and I use all of my strength to pull away and slam the door. When I get home, I look in the mirror, and I have some nasty bruises on my neck. I try to cover it up with makeup to no avail. I straight up look like I've almost been strangled to death. Then he started texting me obscenities. Anyway, I blocked him and reported him on Tinder. I wish I could have done more because I seriously think he would have killed me. I've been debating going to the police, but the bruises are gone now, and it is a he said she said thing. But I'm really starting to wonder if I should, because the next girl might not be so lucky. This story takes place 10 years ago, when I was 16, and for almost that long, I've wanted to tell it. I'm 25 now and female. When I was in high school, I babysat on the odd occasion for a family I'd known since I was pretty young. They were great, really laid back, and it was the easiest babysitting job in the world, because the kids would usually be in bed before I even got there, and always slept really well. It had been about a year since I'd babysat for them, and in that time, they had a new baby, who was about 6 months old. So on this occasion it was me, and 3 kids downstairs, and 1 baby sleeping upstairs. I should really mention before anything that their house was completely amazing. It wasn't the flashiest, but it was huge. And although it was a suburban street, it was positioned on a hill, so from the master bedroom upstairs, you could look out over the whole city. They had tons of CDs, which back then was really exciting for me. The kitchen was always full, and the whole place was decorated like a gallery, with amazing art, brilliantly designed, and really spacious, that sort of thing. They always had interesting stuff around too. That night, I noticed in the front room, amongst the kids' stuff, there was a fake samurai sword. I remember laughing at it, thinking it looked too real to be a toy, and waved it around a bit. It didn't surprise me. They were interesting people, and I was always finding things I liked. The layout of the house was cool. The front door opened almost directly into the living room, and off to the side had the 2 kids' bedrooms and then a staircase leading up to the parents' room. Their living room was fantastic, with giant windows overlooking the front garden, and almost the entire street. The middle part of the house was completely open plan, with a kitchen and dining room spread out for what seemed like miles. Near the back of the house, they even had a small study, which was more like a reading nook. From memory, it was just an armchair and 2 walls of books. That part is important, because the night this happened, that's where I was hanging out. I had been dropped off by my parents at around 8:30, and the mum and dad left soon after, telling me the kids were fast asleep, and if they had any problems with the baby, I could wake their eldest daughter, who was good at settling him, and would help me if I needed it. I remember being comforted by that, because I knew virtually nothing about babies. I didn't need to in the end, because the kids slept fine. But the important thing is, I felt safe, at ease. They told me that they would be back around 1 a.m. and to call if I needed anything. I wasn't worried. I'd done this countless times before, and even though it was a cold night, with a harsh wind, I knew this house, and I knew the kids would sleep. I knew nothing would happen. I felt completely at home. I felt so safe actually, that when I had trouble locking the screen door after they'd gone, I didn't stress too much about it. I thought maybe it was jammed or something. I didn't have a key to the front door, and usually the screen door shut just fine. I lived in a good neighborhood though, and it didn't occur to me at the time that it was anything to worry about. I quickly forgot about it, and went to study and read, after quickly peeking on the kids. I lost track of time for a while. I didn't have a mobile phone when I was 16, and there were no clocks in the reading room. I was totally lost in a book, and before I knew it, a couple of hours had gone by. But it wasn't realizing the time that woke me from my reading stupor. It was nothing at all, and that's what was so frightening. I'd been deep in the book, and then all of a sudden looked up and felt such an intense dread. Suddenly, everything seemed more quiet, and then I heard the wind. An unease of fear washed over me, so much so that I felt reluctant to move. I didn't understand. I thought to myself that this was ridiculous. I thought as I stared at the books on the wall that maybe I'd been sitting too long. So I got up and slowly wandered into the kitchen, with the intent of checking on the kids, and then maybe watching some TV. The front living room was in darkness. As I stepped into it on my way to the bedrooms, something stopped me dead in my tracks, with the light of the kitchen illuminating me from behind. I stood frozen, paralyzed by the sight of a man standing in the front garden. He didn't move, and neither did I. I could see that he had shut the garden gate behind him, and from his position in the garden, it was clear that he'd been walking towards the front door. The front door that was unlocked. I didn't know what to do. A million thoughts started to overwhelm me. I had no weapon. The door was open. I could get the kids downstairs and the baby upstairs in time. But he was huge and I was small. I was lit, and he was in darkness, dressed all in black. I've never seen anything more terrifying in my life. I knew if I didn't do something, he would come inside and get us. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted the fake samurai sword, and very slowly, bending down slightly but not taking my eyes off the figure in the garden, I picked it up and raised it in the air above my head. I don't know why, but I couldn't think of anything else, and after what seemed like an eternity, he slowly turned and walked towards the gate, opened it, and walked away down the street. It was only then that I saw the glint of something at his side, something he'd hidden in one hand as he stood staring at the house. I stood there for a long time watching him walk away. and then I ran to the front door and leaned against it, forcing it shut against an intruder that was no longer there. I was 16 and I was stupid. I never called anyone. I stayed that way until the parents got home, and I never told them what happened. I never told anyone for a long time. I thought everyone would blame me for putting the kids in danger, and then I convinced myself that it was nothing, and maybe I overreacted. The family today are all fine and well, and nothing ever happened to them or their house after that night. But I've always been thankful for that moment of intense dread that caused me to leave the study, because if I hadn't, I don't even let myself think of how differently that night could have gone. So, man in the garden, I hope the fake sword was enough to scare you away from lurking outside of people's houses at night. And I hope we never meet again. I'm an officer in New York City. I've seen some insane stuff. A lot of the things that have happened to me have been very nasty and gory. However, this was the creepiest thing by far that I have ever seen. I was sent to a wellness check. The individual in question was found lying face down on the bedroom floor, dead, and had been for a few days at least. The deceased's room was littered with voodoo or witchcraft shit. Whoever it was into some weird crap. After the body was removed and the family notified, the apartment was sealed. Now, for New York City, this means that the door is locked, and a big fluorescent green sticker is placed over the door and the door frame, so that the door can't be opened without the sticker being torn. Fast forward a week or so, the deceased's brother arrives with the surrogate court paperwork to enter the apartment to try and find a will. We get to the door, and the sticker is ripped. Thinking someone like the superintendent of the building had went into the apartment without permission, we had the security desk pull up the camera footage of the hallway. After about 20 minutes of looking for it, we found it. The door seal, for no apparent reason, quite literally exploded at the seam. Footage just showed an empty hall with the door in clear view. Then suddenly the seal just pops at the seam, sending pieces flying to the door. The door had no give or gap to jiggle it, so a quick pressure change couldn't move the door significantly to cause it to rip. That shit was creepy as hell, and we still have no explanation for it. I just wanted to say good luck to whoever had to pick up all those voodoo dolls. I grew up in a Hindu cult. It was the truth, exemplified in our guru with his lifestyle of 6 cars, 2 mansions, 3 businesses, and international vacations in first class, together with annual celebrations of his family members' birthdays, all of which we were solicited to pay for and sponsored to the bottom of our pockets. We had to be in debt up to our eyeballs in order to prove our devotion. We were the elite, destined for self-realization, and were only allowed to have limited association with the rest of the world, even with our own non-believer families. Disobedience meant shunning and expulsion. We celebrated our birthdays only by decorating the guru's home and giving gifts to him and his family. I was homeschooled and attended university by long-distance learning, all so that I could stay in the group with our strict timetables of daily morning and evening prayers, communal meals, and morning and evening sermons by the guru. We had mandatory purification baths every morning and evening, and if we were to touch something polluted, like an unbathed person, old food, a menstruating woman, or dirty clothes, or even a thread from a cloth. We had to bathe and change clothes all over again. Some of the rules like that were really weird. We asked the Guru's permission for every step in our lives. About our education, our career, our marriage. Vaccines were frowned upon, and if you got chickenpox or cancer or had an accident, it's because you had bad karma or ego. Girls had to wear their hair long, and both sexes had to wear old-fashioned traditional clothes that covered us from shoulder to ankle. We had to be vegetarian, and it was easy to control people, as we lived in rental accommodation owned by the Guru's organization. Overseas disciples had visas sponsored by him, and he handled our utilities, phones and internet. These were occasionally cut off or destroyed, once or twice by bulldozers, to discipline some disciples. In addition to the public shaming during the sermons and being yelled at, we also got physical correction, or purification as he called it. It was considered a blessing to be hit by him, as it was his guidance and his touch was sacred. Teens were strictly supervised. We got in trouble after a group of teens went out, chaperoned, mind you, to a local temple's dance and music program, and more seriously when we went to the beach, since the cult provided everything we needed in life. Romance was of course forbidden, and marriages arranged by the Guru between group members. The more the couple was opposed to each other, the more ideal it would be, as it put the Guru first always in your marriage. Even those young people who vomited in disgust or swore they'd rather die were gently coerced into marriages, gays too, with the opposite sex. Several disciples were encouraged to and did break off their engagements or divorce their significant other, believing that it would be blocking the light and drive them insane. 2 girls eloped, and no one, including their families, attended the wedding. We were all told that natural disasters and man-made tragedies were due to our impurities. To offset these, we made huge donation to the Guru's temple. He even had a badly hidden camera to film worshippers who thought they were alone. We were told that in fact nothing would be immoral if the Guru, the living truth, asked it, whether financial, transactions, plagiarism, lying or stealing. Information was strictly controlled. Gradually movies were banned and our libraries disbanded. People were told to stop talking to one another. New babies were secluded at home. Disobedient disciples were sent out of town and shunned for several days as punishment. Around the point that we were told to cut off our mobile phones and give up our Wi-Fi and data and abandoned our pets, I read up on cults on the internet and decided to get out. I sold my jewellery to finance my plane ticket, driving lessons, and returned to university classes and a cult recovery workshop. In my recovery group, I discovered how similar our cults were. My friends and family in the cult have cut me off. My other family and ex-cult members have welcomed me back with open arms. When I am bored, I sometimes hop onto Tinder to meet new and interesting people. I rarely attempt to meet these people in person, and when I do, it's normally just to meet up. Well, this was one of those nights I met a really nice sounding woman who said that she loves caffeine and video games. We were talking for a while that night, and when I was ready to get off and go to bed, she asked if I wanted her number. I didn't want her to have my number, so I said, "No, that's okay. I know where to find you." I meant on Tinder. Fast forward to the next day, when the new Assassin's Creed game originally came out. I had pre-ordered the games months before, and walked into literally the closest GameStop to my house, and guess who I see behind the counter? She had a sheer look of horror on her face, but I hadn't quite figured out it was her. There wasn't much of a line, and I got up to the register and she yells loud enough so everyone in the store can hear, "This is what you meant?" And she stormed off to the back room, and a couple of minutes later, another employee came out and asked me to leave. One thing I should point out is that in person, this girl looked nothing like her profile picture, so I still don't know what's going on. I explained this to the new employee that was there when I picked up my pre-order, and I didn't understand why I needed to leave. They then threatened to call the cops if I didn't leave, so I ended up giving up and leaving. Later, I got a message on Tinder asking how I knew where she worked. I did not respond to this message. Instead, I called the GameStop, explained that I didn't want to upset Kathy anymore, and I had asked if I could move my pre-order to another store. The manager apologized to me and was able to move my pre-order. Even though this is the closest GameStop to my house, I haven't returned, and it will probably be a while before I do. We got sent to do a well-being check for an old lady that lived by herself in a rough section of the city. This was a few years back, but if I remember correctly, she had no family or friends, and some sort of wellness aide had called it in. No one had heard from her for a few days. We knock and announce ourselves, then we get nothing. We get a property manager on the phone, and he comes by with keys. We open the door, and there she is, very dead on the floor, with a look of fear and pain frozen over her face. One of her feet was detached, and was about a meter away from her body, with blood everywhere. I instantly assumed she was murdered, and get a shot of adrenaline. But when we take a second to take the whole scene in, we figure out how the woman died. She needed to adjust her blinds, so she got a chair from the kitchen, stood up on the chair, and lost her balance. She fell and landed on her foot, which snapped clean off her leg. She then proceeded to crawl around bleeding until she passed out and died. I've seen much worse, but this one sticks with me, because I can't even imagine the thoughts running through her head as she was dying, all alone and unable to summon help. This happened in high school. I was a sophomore and had a pretty sweet babysitting gig at a house 2 doors down. 3 awesome little girls who thankfully never gave me any trouble. Their parents were great too, some of the nicest people I've ever met. And lastly, they had an old Akita dog who was the sweetest thing on the planet. I had met a guy who was a senior in a club I was part of, and at first he was cool. We talk about the nerdy things we both liked, and he'd read me some of his writings. He fancied himself a poet or something. I had a boyfriend, who is now my darling husband, so all I ever was interested in was a friendship with this guy, but he didn't have the same idea, and he certainly didn't like my boyfriend. I was nice about it, accepted that he didn't like my boyfriend, but made it very clear that him and I were friends. I guess not clear enough. One Saturday night as I was babysitting the little girls, while their parents were at some fancy gala, as the husband was a well-known doctor in our area, I had done the whole bedtime routine, and settled down with the dog on the couch for a movie marathon. I was texting some friends on my fancy flip phone, and one of them happened to be the guy. He texted me that he could bet what I was wearing. I didn't like the game, assuming that it might end up somewhere inappropriate, so I just ignored him. A few minutes later, he texts me again, this time with the exact outfit I had down to my mismatched socks. I froze. There is no way he could have known this. I'd been home all day other than when I came to babysit, so he hadn't seen me. The Akita dog's head perched up, and he started growling in the direction of the back door. I swear I saw a shadow running away when I turned the porch light on The dog stuck by my side for the rest of the night. I even called my brother to come and sit with me until the parents came back. They thought nothing of my brother being there, and since this was my problem to deal with, I didn't tell them about my potential stalker. At school, he acted like nothing happened. I told him this was wrong, and I couldn't be friends with him if he was going to play these games. A few weeks later, he left school, and I haven't seen him since. He tried to friend me on Facebook recently, but I'm content with us not meeting again, even over social media. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I love listening to the sound of rain, even though it doesn't really help much when recording. I find it so relaxing. And remember that if you enjoyed today's video, please consider dropping a like and leaving a comment, as it's a really great way to help support the channel and I appreciate it tremendously. And if you'd like to do something incredible to help support the channel further, feel free to visit my Patreon. You can find a link in the description as well as the links to my social media. And if you'd like your story read on my channel, you can submit it as a text post to my Reddit page or send it to me via email. Both links can be found in the description. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.
Mortis Media.
The pitter-patter of rain can certainly be comforting on a dark night whilst trying to fall asleep. But it can also be used as a smokescreen for those out to get you. It's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This encounter happened to me a while ago. I couldn't share it for a long time, but now I feel ready. I live in the country in Ohio, down a long drive. Fields on two sides and woods in the back. I'm about a mile away from town, so if I need the police, I have to call the sheriff. I live with my husband and Boxer. The night this happened, my husband was getting some overtime at his factory. It was a Saturday, and he was working third shift. I had spent the evening at my parents' house, and didn't get home until around midnight. I stopped in town at a 24-hour gas station to get some drinks and chocolate and a beef jerky for my dog, Alize. I exit the gas station, and I get this feeling that's so strong, I just look around, because I knew that someone was outside with me. Over to my left, about 20 feet away, is a girl in a really cute little dress with a white horse mask on, just standing there. We stared at each other for about a minute before I hopped into my car and quickly pulled out onto the road, almost hitting a light pole as I belatedly checked my backseat for danger. That was unnerving, but I was home just a few minutes later, giving Alize jerky and eating chocolate and watching TV. All of a sudden, my dog takes off down the hall to the back porch, barking and growling and attacking the window. I run in, afraid a window was going to be broken again, as she broke one last time trying to get at a coyote. I stopped dead in my tracks. There, standing at the window, is a horse mask. Again, we stared at each other. I looked over to the back door. Was it locked? Shit, I couldn't remember. The horse mask looks over at the door. Slowly I walk over to it. So does the horse mask. We both reach for the knob. It was locked. Horse mask looks behind her, and for the first time, I look around my backyard. There is a guy in a horse mask as well. Okay, this is enough. I am calling the cops. I get Alizé and shut the door to the porch and went into the living room to get my cell phone. Of course, I left my cell phone in the car when I carried my stuff into the house. In my car that's in my garage. My dark garage. Basically lacking any choice, I opened the door to the garage and tried to open my car door. But oh, guess what? I must have locked it in and didn't have the key. I crept back in the house. No signs of Alizé. No horse mask in the backyard that I could see from the kitchen window. And there was no horse mask in the backyard that I could see from the kitchen window anyway. I grabbed my keys and got the phone. I called the sheriff and told him what happened, that I was followed home and alone. They asked if we were still outside. I looked out of the window, room by room. Nothing, until I got to the front yard. Right out the front, they were there, about 100 feet away holding hands, staring. I honestly was crying at this point to the dispatcher, who assured me that they would be there soon. As I stood there, clearly on the phone, the girl waved. Then they walked hand in hand down my lane and out of sight. It took the sheriff 10 minutes to get there. They found nothing, and told me the guy probably sat in the car and they followed me. Just kids being kids, they said. My dog didn't come out of my bedroom for the rest of the night. I sat up listening to silence until my husband got home. A couple of weeks later, someone from the sheriff's office stopped by to follow up. They said they checked the camera at the gas station, but all it showed was the girl walking up by the dumpsters and stand there until I left. And then she just walked away. Growing up, I would always have these odd experiences. Things would disappear and reappear a few days later in the strangest places. Music would play at odd times, and sometimes I would be the only one who could hear it. I would just know things, and I would have no way of knowing. Mostly, these things were daily occurrences, so I didn't think much of it. But one story will never leave me. It was my 12th birthday, and since my parents were in the middle of a bad divorce, my dad decided to take me to my favourite amusement park near my hometown. Just me and him, as a father-daughter day out. It was a big treat for me, and I was so excited. But then, the day came. I was wearing a new outfit, as was my dad, and I was excited, but still, I almost felt guilty for it. I couldn't figure out what it was. It wasn't a guilt feeling for going to the park. It was more of what was to come. I knew I shouldn't go. Normally, I would listen to this feeling and avoid what I was about to do. But I had been so excited for this day, and we had had some rough times, so we deserved to have some fun for once. So we did. In the car, I was telling my dad how excited I was to go, and I could tell that so was he. We were talking, and all of a sudden I turned to him, as we got closer, and said, "What if we didn't go to the amusement park? My dad, without hesitation and a smile, says, "Then we can do something else. It's your birthday, so it's up to you." Reply, "I'd like to go to the cinema or something." My dad chuckles a little and says, "Yes, of course." But no, I wanted to go to the amusement park, and I felt bad to change the plans when we were basically already there, so we ended up going. The first thing we did when we got in was go to our favourite ride, the bobsleigh track. It's a simple ride, but we both really enjoyed it. We stood in the queue, got in the sleigh, and went down the hill in our separate sleighs. I was finally old enough to ride my own sleigh, so this was a big deal. At the bottom, my dad says to me, "Do you want to go again?" I hesitated, but I thought, yeah, why not? We had all day to go on the other rides. The dread hit me again. We got in the queue, and I remember looking at the guy letting us on the ride one last time. It was all too familiar, and it made me wildly uncomfortable. I could tell my dad could sense something was bothering me. Why would I hesitate going on my favourite ride again? It wasn't déjà vu. It wasn't a dream. I just knew what was going to happen, without knowing it. I know that sounds strange, but this feeling can't be explained. I was on the top of the hill, screaming with joy, having the time of my life. Then I saw it. The dread. The thing that I had been warned about all day suddenly made sense. My dad was lying on the side in the grass, and he was injured. His white t-shirt was covered in blood, and he couldn't move. I hit the brakes as hard as I could, and I took the sled off the track to not be in the way of other people, and pulled my dad off the sled, enough so that he wouldn't be hit. People kept passing us, staring at us, as if we were just part of this show or something. I kept getting more and more furious as no one asked if we needed help. My dad was very visually injured, so there was little to be confused about. I got back on my sled and slid down to the bottom to get help, and no one seemed to react or care to what I had to say. I was bawling my eyes out, and I felt like no one could see or hear me. At last, a woman approached me. She had seen my dad and asked if she could help. My dad asked if she could keep an eye on me and got help. I sat on the bench waiting. The people working there reacted like zombies, as if we were a nuisance, as if this was all routine. Help finally came, and they carried my dad down from the hill to the ambulance. I followed them, but stopped, looking back up at the ride, hating myself for letting this happen. Every step I took until I climbed into the ambulance were all too familiar. Not like I had done this before, but as if something told me I had just forgot. To this day, I always listen to this feeling. If it's something I'm about to do or someone that I've just met, I avoid whatever it might be, as it's the best thing to do without causing alarm, and it has always proven to be the right choice. I am in my mid-20s and consider myself to be a pretty small woman, both in height and weight. I've never taken any self-defense classes, and would be in big trouble if someone were to attack me. At present, I live in a suburb outside of Boston, Massachusetts, with 2 other young female roommates. We live in a condominium complex that has roughly 200 units, and our condo happens to be in the furthest corner of the grounds. We are the last unit in a row of 10, with woods to our left and back. The area that we live in is widely regarded as a high crime / sketchy part of town. but I was never genuinely concerned about my safety until one night in October 2015. I had just flown back to Boston from a work trip in Tampa, Florida. My flight arrived at Logan Airport around 10:30 p.m. and between gathering my luggage and car, I didn't make it back to my apartment until midnight. I locked my car, grabbed my suitcase, and headed inside to an empty apartment. I wasn't worried about staying in the condo alone, as it was a pretty typical situation. My two roommates were often working late or staying over at their boyfriends. As always, I locked the screen door, then the wooden door, and felt that it was enough protection from the world outside. I was greeted by my cat and went into my room. The temperature was unusually warm for October, so I opened all my windows and crawled into bed. I should note here that, as I mentioned before, the backside of our apartment is surrounded by woods. We have a row of parking spaces directly behind us, but other than that, it's strictly forest. That particular night, I was lucky enough to find parking in the spots that lie directly beneath my bedroom window. At 3:30 a.m., I woke up to footsteps and rustling outside. I figured that it was one of the other residents either getting back from the bar or grabbing something from their vehicle. So I rolled over and tried to fall back to sleep. About 4 to 5 minutes of loud rustling though, I decided to check what was going on. To my horror, a massive man wearing all black clothing and a black mask was inside the passenger door of my car, going through my glove box. I was so shocked to see someone was in my car that it took me a few moments to understand what was going on. Realizing that someone had broken into my car, I immediately panicked. I have a spare key taped to the inside of my glove box, and my apartment door was literally steps away from where he was standing. I knew that fleeing wasn't an option, and he was blocking my only exit. I also knew that if he were to use the key to get into my condo, I'd likely be in a very dangerous situation. Out of pure stupidity, I grabbed my car keys and hit the lock button, which caused my car to beep. The loud beep startled the man who was inside my car, so much so that he backed up and stumbled a little on the curb. Within seconds, he looked up at my bedroom window, and our eyes met. He knew that I had seen him in my car, and to my dismay, he held my stare without flinching. I was so terrified that I backed up from the window and immediately ran to my roommate's closet. I dialed 911 and reported the situation in a really hushed whisper, fully expecting the man to break in and find me inside her room. It took the officers 12 minutes to arrive to my condo, by which time the guy had already taken off and left the complex. I still don't know how he was able to get into my car that night, as I'm sure that I locked it. Additionally, there were plenty of other cars in the lot that night anyway, that were much nicer than mine. Amazingly, nothing was stolen. I didn't have much in there anyway, but the scary thing was that the latch to our screen door was completely broken off. I didn't hear him try to gain entry into the house, but I was also in the closet and on the phone with a 911 dispatcher, so who knows? All I can say is that I'm so lucky that I had my windows open that night and interrupted him. Otherwise, he might have used the keys to get in. It goes without saying, but to the man dressed completely in black, let's not meet. I am from Finland, and that's also where these things that I'm about to describe to you happened. This was some years ago, pre-smartphone/GPS. It was the end of summer, and myself and 2 friends were on a camping trip away up in the north, in Lapland. The mosquito season was over, and the weather was cooling down in anticipation of the coming fall. The 3 of us had packed food, water and gear for a 10-day trek. The car we arrived in had been left at the parking lot of a visitor centre. This happened all within the premises of the Urho Kekkonen National Park, a 985 square mile stretch of wilderness near the Russian border. The terrain there varies greatly, from treeless and semi-mountainous to dense forests of spruce and pine and dwarf birch. There are lots of swamps. Seeing reindeer is not uncommon, and some nights you might hear wolves in the distance. You can run into bear or wolverines in this place, but of course, normally they avoid people. We mostly camped in a tent, but some nights we used shelters and simple huts provided for travellers free of charge. We were 5 days into the trip, and we were the furthest from any kind of civilization that we were going to be on that particular outing. Truly, the middle of nowhere. There really is nothing there. No villages, towns or industry. The place is a national park after all. Seeing other hikers happened from time to time. You'd see some people in the distance maybe. Very rarely would you come face to face with anyone. So in the middle of our trip, we were camped in a small clearing, woodland extending around us for a considerable distance in all directions. It was already dark. We had eaten our evening meal, and all 3 of us were jammed in our only tent. It was a bit cramped, but we fit. We took turns carrying it during the hikes. We were just exchanging some jokes and crude humour in the dark, like guys in their 20s often do, about to go to sleep in our sleeping bags. When we quieted down, we began to hear it, talking, and the sound of machinery. Given our location, this was profoundly weird. We camped in a tent because there were no huts nearby. Maybe there was another camp somewhere near us? We couldn't quite make out what was being said, but it was human voices. No doubt about it. But nothing really could explain the sound of heavy machinery. It sounded like an excavator or a tank. Something big and powerful, and not too far off. Combined with the sound of talking, we were convinced it must have been some construction yard. But at that time of night, in an unpopulated, protected nature reserve. So we got out of our tents. It was cold and pitch black. The campfire had some coal still glowing, so we took out our flashlights. My 2 buddies had always been a lot braver than I, and the sound was clearly coming from the north, maybe half a kilometre away. We thought the construction might be going on behind a small hill some distance away. We could see no lights or anything, and we still couldn't make out what was being said. The speaking-like voice was monotonous, and it was impossible to even say which language was being used. It still sounded a lot like a person speaking, though. You may be aware of the sort of spooky phenomenon of just hearing a human voice in static. Maybe you used a blow dryer and been sure someone is talking, turn it off, and then it was just something the brain tried to interpret from the steady hum. Maybe it was something like that. It's hard to explain. The machinery-like sound continued, not loud, but you could sort of make out the powerful engine, at times accelerating, adding power, and at times idle. My two friends resolved to go and find out what it was. We put our warm clothes back on, donned our boots, and I sat next to the dying fire, adding some more wood to it, and would stay at camp whilst my buddies left to check out this mysterious construction yard in the middle of nowhere in the Lapland woods. So there I sat. The guys took out their maps, took a compass, heading, and left. And I could hear them make their way through the forest. I see the lights from their flashlights, and then they were gone. And the weird sounds continued, unaltered. They were gone for 15 to maybe 30 minutes, and then the better part of an hour. It was odd. Judging by the volume of the sound, they should have reached it, checking it out and been back already. I added more firewood, and tried to make out what the person was talking about or saying, but it was simply too tiny and obscure. Time ticked away, and they had been gone for over 2 hours now. I figured they must have stayed for coffee with the construction guys or something. And then the sound just stopped. Just like that. It ended, all at the same time. The engine sound and the voices both just were gone. It was very quiet. I waited for another 30 minutes, very worried now that something had happened, that maybe my friends were lost. Should I go and try and find them? I shouted their names several times and built the fire pretty big. I'm not going to lie, I was scared shitless when I suddenly saw the flashlights of my friends. Apparently they were returning in a hurry. The guys got back to camp out of breath, and they told me the following. They had followed the sound beyond the small ridge in the distance. There was nothing there, and it seemed like they were not getting any closer to the source of the sounds. They had to stop now and then, be quiet and listen, but were able to walk towards it. They walked and stopped like this for some time, but then realized that they were not getting any closer. The sounds did not change in volume at all. They decided to just go a bit further several times, when suddenly the sound just stopped, like someone had just pressed the off button on a recording. They realized they had been gone for a long time. They were in the middle of dark woods alone. They reversed the heading and started back at a brisk pace. Eventually they saw my big-ass fire from atop of the hill and found their way back. The weird thing is, we seem to think the sound stopped at different times. They had been gone for 2.5 hours total, and they said the sound stopped at around 1 hour 15 minutes. Then they started to head back immediately. The return trip taking a bit longer, even though they kept good pace, and they apparently wandered around for a bit. For me, the sound stopped at the 2-hour mark, just 30 minutes before they returned. We didn't sleep that night. Nothing more happened on the trip, and we never found out what the weird construction yard sounds were. When we returned to the park visitor centre some 5 days later, we asked, but no one knew of any ongoing construction taking place in the whole park area. It's been bugging me ever since. I walked outside, and I was locking my door behind me, when I noticed a young man, probably 18 to 19 years old. He was either Asian or Hispanic, walking on the side, in front of the stairs that led down to my apartment. He glanced up at me, and I at him, but that was it. Nothing weird. So I walked down the stairs and noticed the guy has disappeared in the minute it took my large pregnant self to go down the stairs. It was really dark on my side of the building, because the apartment complex only keeps the parking lot lit up at night, and with my brain being all silly from the Ambien, I was already on high alert. As soon as I walked out of the little alcove with the steps in it, I thought I saw a person with a white towel or a shirt wrapped around their face, poking their head over the bushes, and then quickly duck back down. Now, I'm not really the type to get scared of things, especially when I was pretty much the epitome of everyone else's worst nightmare when I got angry. So I walked towards the sidewalk, where the bushes are, to keep going to my car, and as soon as I turn the corner, I see him. I am positive it was the same guy I had just seen walking, but he had taken off his shirt and tied it around his face and head like a mask, and now he'd pulled his pants down to mid-thigh and had his penis just hanging out. He was still in a dark area, and I was still on Ambien, so I was pretty sure I was just hallucinating or something. But still, I decided to say something, and it came out as, "What is going on here?" He backed up a few steps because I kept walking in his direction, since my car was that way, and he got more backwards towards the light. And I said it again. "What the hell are you doing here, dude?" He backs up some more into the light, like as if I couldn't see him, and genuinely wanted to see what he was doing better. Then he started jacking off once he was fully in the light. I say, "Yeah, no, I get it, I can see what you're doing." I kept walking in that direction. I don't know if I was stupid or fearless, and the weird guy takes off running away from me with his baggy pants falling down the whole way and his wiener still flopping around. I continue to my car, grab the pillow pet, and turn to walk back to my apartment. But when I get back up to the lit area on the side of the building, he had run a full circle around the building and was back. And now he didn't have pants on anymore and was holding boxes in his hands. He still had the shirt mask on, so just stark naked, standing in the light, facing me. At this point I was irritated, so I yelled, "What are you doing? Is this what you do on Tuesday nights? You get naked outside and run around showing pregnant women your floppy little dick? Go home, weirdo." I kept walking back to my apartment, and I was about 5 feet away from the stairs, and I glanced behind me, and he was back at the bushes where I first saw him, and he finally made a noise, and it was this weird grunt, like a high-pitched squeak. I literally busted out laughing. He was maybe 6 feet behind me, and just came into the boxes he was holding, and he squeaked. I kept walking up the stairs, and when I got to my door, I looked down, and he was still standing there, and I yelled and said, "Well, that was good for me. I'm glad you had an eventful evening. See you next Tuesday." And he yelled, "Shut up," and tried to throw his boxes at me, and they landed on the stairs a few feet away. I said, "That's no way to speak to a lady," and walked into my apartment and locked the door. I called the non-emergency police line and told them about it, and they sent an officer to my apartment, and when I was explaining it to him, he kept laughing and apologizing. They never found the weirdo guy, and I never saw him again either. 8 years ago, I was living in a 2-bedroom apartment by myself with 2 cats. I had a girlfriend, Elsa, who lived 45 minutes away on her college campus. Most weekends, she would drive into town and stay at my place until she had class again on Monday. We did regular things, as we didn't get to see much of each other. We liked to spend time alone, watching movies, playing games, or the like. Please keep in mind that neither of us were drug or alcohol users, as I have a good job and I can't risk losing it, and she simply never cared for intoxicants. Nor were either of us on medication. So, here's the scene. It's Saturday night, 11 p.m. Elsa and I are sitting on the couch watching a movie. We are dressed, sober and alert. We slept in that morning and had had plenty of sleep. We were chatting, laughing, talking, and the TV is illuminating our immediate area. And I kept the light on in the kitchen to provide some ambient light for the living room as well. My cats are asleep in their favourite chair as well, and everybody is safe and comfortable. Suddenly, without any kind of warning or inkling, the jump, as I have to call it, happened. You know when you're watching dialogue in the movie, and they're using 2 cameras to film? When they switch from camera to capture the one speaking, is it seamless? With no clipping, interruption, fading or transition effects? It was that sudden. We were having a good time together in the living room, when in an instant, I found myself sitting on the foot of the bed, clothes removed in the dark. For about 1.5 seconds, a million thoughts entered my mind. Had something fallen off the wall and hit my head? Did I have a seizure? Was I dreaming the whole time? Where was Elsa? Then the scary part. I turned to my right, and Elsa is sitting next to me on the foot of the bed, clothes removed, her eyes the size of golf balls, and she's trembling. I realize that I am as well. I tried to speak to her and ask her if something's happened, but I'm so frightened, I only stutter. After looking around the room and realize we were alive, she manages to ask me what happened. I didn't want to answer, in case it was just me, and I didn't want to come off as nuts. I just looked at her. After a pause, she starts asking me again if I had turned the lights off or removed our clothes, or if I knew what was going on. I didn't. Neither of us had experienced grogginess or confusion before this event. Furthermore, we didn't experience any sensation other than fear and confusion after it. No aches, no pains, no bumps, bruises or cuts. I reached for my phone to call my mum and see if a doctor would be appropriate. I noticed that it's not 11 p.m. anymore. It's now 3 a.m. In that sudden instant, that instantaneous change of scene, 4 hours had passed. Everything in the house had been turned off, and we had been stripped. We went to the ER, as my mum feared that it was a gas leak. No signs of toxins or injury were found in either of us. Elsa made an appointment for a CAT scan, which also came back as expected. I explored possibilities like a gas leak, poisoned consumer goods like our soda or fast food, neurological malfunctions and more. Elsa would get scared at the memory and beg me to just let it go. I couldn't. I'm no writer, but I'm sure I left some things out that should have been more helpful in understanding the magnitude and surrealism of this event and how it affected Elsa and I. If you have an answer, I've been waiting 8 years to hear it. Someone tell me what happened to me. The scariest moment of my life occurred when I was the age of 10 and in 4th grade. The reason I remember that so distinctly was because the incident happened a week before my birthday, in March of the year 2003. The clarity of the 15-minute or so ordeal has stuck with me to this day, and, at the time, it really messed me up for about 5 years. After this event, I told my friend, who was immediately intrigued, and he was the only one who suggested to talk about it. The day that turned into a horror story for me started off on a rather exciting note. My parents informed me that, for the first time ever, I would be staying home alone for a little while, since they were going to a party and would not be back until at least midnight. And my younger brother, who was 9 at the time, was sleeping over at his friend's house a few blocks away. Now this probably doesn't sound like much, but let me tell you, to a 4th grader, that kind of independence seems incredible. Evening comes, and I remember spending most of the night from 6 to 10 p.m. playing GameCube without my parents enforcing their usual limits. Now, before I get into the part where my night went downhill, allow me to give some background information on where I lived. My neighborhood is in southeast Michigan and was filled with mostly middle/upper class homes and was spread out fairly spaciously. It isn't like giant 4-acre country plots, but there is a good 100 yards in between houses. Enough room for privacy, but close enough to feel like a community. I lived in a 3-level home, about 4 minutes into the subdivision from a main road. So at 10 p.m, my developing self-control told me that I should probably stop playing video games and head upstairs for some rest. I brushed my teeth and decided to read in bed until I got tired. After around 10 minutes of reading, the chime of the doorbell suddenly snapped me out of my peaceful state. I lay in bed for a second, and then cautiously walked out of my room. I stood on the landing, on the top floor, peering down into the darkness of the main floor, and I jumped as the doorbell rang twice more. My young mind was racing, and I was thinking of all the possibilities of who it could be. Was it my parents coming home early? They would have used the garage, right? Was it my brother's friend who lived next door? Well, it seemed to be kind of late for that. I didn't turn on the light to the stairway, but instead, slowly, started to descend the stairs to go to the door. My stairs are 5 feet to the left of the front door, and when I was halfway down them, I could clearly look out the decorative half circle of glass that is on top of the door. What I saw gave me one of those moments where you can feel your whole body flush with hot blood as the adrenaline kicks in and your heart rate rapidly accelerates. Facing the front door were 3 men in masks. I only glanced for a second, but they are ingrained in my memory forever. All 3 masks were grotesque Halloween style, with wiry hair sticking out in all directions on the back. In a split second, I ran back upstairs debating what to do. This was all pre-cell phones, so I couldn't call my parents, and I foolishly thought at the time the police would be mad or wouldn't believe such a young kid dialing 911. I crept into my upstairs bathroom that was directly over the front door to get another look at the men in the masks, and I remember shaking from fear. Sense was quickly leaving me, and I mistakenly turned a light on in the bathroom. I crawled to the blinds and pushed one up to get a view. All 3 men were still standing there, but I also saw a 4th masked person crouched underneath a large pine tree in front of my yard, holding an object I didn't immediately recognize. Over the years, I have speculated either a camera or a firearm, but never knew for sure. However, in my haste, the slot of light streaming out the window quickly caught their attention, and they gazed up at me. I'm sure my small figure was outlined by the light, and this led them to start banging on the door and beckoning me to come down. I stood there with tears streaming down my face, me looking down the 4 figures in masks through a gap in the blinds, and them staring right back at me. Suddenly, They left the front door and went to the side door of the house. I ran to my room, turned off all the lights, and started huddling underneath my desk, hiding. I could hear the motion light by the sliding glass door facing my backyard clicking on and off for the next 15 minutes, but I didn't dare to look outside. I braced myself to hear pounding on the downstairs back window, and at any moment it felt like I would hear glass shattering and then barging inside, crying, shivering, not feeling safe in my own house. Had to be the worst 15 minutes of my life, especially at such a young age. Thankfully, after a while, the motion light shut off for good. There was no trace of them. My parents came home to me wedged in between the wall and the bed in the guest room, eyes wide with fear. I told them what happened, and my dad explained to me there wasn't really any evidence or anything for the police to track. For a few years I became super protective of my brother and wouldn't let him go outside alone for fear of the masked men. I thankfully never had any other encounters, but it messed me up pretty bad for quite a while. This happened in the early 2000s, when I was working at a juvenile detention center in a small town in Oklahoma as a corrections officer. I was working nights at the time and went to work at 9 p.m. This one night, when I arrived for work, my supervisor looked confused and asked me what I was doing there. I said, "I work tonight." And he said, "But you called a few hours ago saying that you were sick." I was a bit confused and said, "It must have been someone else and they got the message wrong." After everyone else showed up for work that night, it was a bit more weird, but we carried on as usual and assigned everyone their places for the night. I went to work in the control room, where I usually work. The control room is in the center of the prison. That has direct control over the cameras, doors, phones, and everything. After I relieved the guard on duty and settled in for the night, I looked at the message that said I called in. It said that I had called at 6:50 and said that I had gotten sick while out clearing up after the storm. There had been a storm the night before, and it was quite bad, but not anything that I had to go clean up, so it was quite weird. The supervisor came into the control room around that time. He was also a friend of mine from outside of work, and I decided to call my wife at home and tell her about it whilst he was still sitting there. I picked up the phone and dialed, and after 2 rings a man picked up the phone with a raspy voice and said, "Hello?" I did not know what to say for a few seconds. I looked at the phone to make sure I had dialed the right number. I had. A few seconds later the person said, "Hello?" again, in the same raspy voice. I said, "Hello, who is this?" "This is Taylor." "Who is this?" the person said. My head started spinning, because my name is Taylor. I said in an almost scream, "Where is Anne?" He said, "Anne is in bed. Who is this?" I dropped the phone and told my supervisor to ring me out. I had to get home, and I took off towards the door. I could hear Dave pick up the phone behind me and say, "Hello?" soon followed by, "What the hell?" I ran to my car and drove home as fast as I could, my mind racing the entire time. I bust through the door, and my wife was sitting there watching TV, and was shocked at me being home. I asked her who was there, and she said no one had been there. And after a rather long talk with my wife, I went to call the prison to tell them what was going on, but the phone was dead. I went back to work, and when I came in, Dave was acting weird and asked me, "How the hell are you doing this?" He told me that when I left, he picked up the phone and the person on the other end sounded like me. He kind of freaked out and hung up. A minute later, as he could see my car leave the parking lot, I had called back from home and asked what the hell was going on. He said that I was a bit irate and said that I was sick and did not feel like playing these games and was telling him to stop prank calling me and hung up. After convincing him I had no idea what was going on, we went back to work. Later, I find out the phone line in my area had been knocked down the entire night before the storm. This is absolutely the strangest thing that has ever happened to me. I've never been a girl who is scared easily. I routinely watch crime shows, horror movies, etc. However, a night in March of 2005 changed all of that for me. I was attending college for music in 2005 and had recently seen one of my favourite violinists. Inspired, I had asked a pianist friend to accompany me whilst I played a piece. Looking back, it wasn't smart on our part to go at night to the college music practice rooms, which are nearly soundproof and separated from the rest of the building. I figured since it was across the street from the campus police headquarters, we must be okay. Was I ever wrong? My friend and I are practicing in a room for about 15 minutes, when she looks at me and says, "Don't freak out, but there's a guy with a mask on behind you." Now, this is college. There are plenty of stupid people doing stupid stuff. When I turn around, I realized this was much more sinister. There, crouched on the other side of the practice room's glass door, is a skinny guy, about 5'8", wearing a blonde curly wig, with the Groucho Marx glasses and nose combo, and a hideous shirt, and the creepiest smile ever. That's right, no pants or underwear, just his small penis out and exposed. When I turned around, he waves, and then enters this tiny practice room. My friend and I try to remain calm, because we honestly don't know what to do. And this guy tries to strike up small talk with us, and mentions he heard me talking about my favourite violinist. Apparently he's been standing outside the practice room for the entire time. He knows our names, where I had gone that day, where our hometown is, my guy problem at the time, etc. As soon as possible, my friend and I book it out of there. He was blocking the door most of the time, so we were really scared. As we're leaving, he says, "Let's do this again sometime, Felicity." Of course, we run to the campus police department, and they think it's all pretty funny. The next day, I'm sitting in choir when the dean comes in and says, "Hey, a friend of your cousin stopped by today. He said he wanted to give you some CDs," which happened to be of my favourite violinist. He asked for the girl who played violin with your first name, so I'm assuming it was you. I go on to tell him what happened, and he's furious because the campus security didn't do a thing. That's when the stalking began. He soon was clever enough not to go by the music office again, but my dorm neighbours would tell me that a guy was looking to give me some kind of gift. One time, a stack of CDs from various violinists were sitting in my assigned seat for choir. Another time, they were outside my door. All the while, campus security did nothing. Some people even suggested I should enjoy the attention. things died down when I finally moved off campus and stopped altogether when I moved away from the college town. Until 2 years ago, when I moved back into the same town, the first week back, I received a direct message on Twitter saying, "Glad you're back. I've missed you. Let's get together and listen to some violin, shall we?" I reported it to the police, who haven't caught the person to my knowledge, as they know the address came from somewhere other than my city. Part of me is still waiting for a knock at the door or a present left at my work or home. I was a teenager visiting my cousins in San Antonio, Texas. My parents are divorced, and we were visiting my father's sister, so it was my dad, my younger brother, myself, and 4 cousins, aunt and uncle. We go down there and stay for a week or so every year, and find things around the state to do. Mexico 1 year, the Alamo River another, river walk, the obvious stuff. We were at this enormous water park. I can't stress how big this place felt, and although I can't remember the exact layout or anything like that, I do remember a few key things. There were a ton of people, and it was really noisy. My brother and I have always remained really close. We moved a lot, and shared many of the same friends, with only 2 years difference between us. Anyway, we were walking much faster than the rest of the family. We kept hearing them call for us to stop, and we'd turn around and wait for them to catch up. In any case, my dad finally figures out that we're too psyched to mosey around this legendary water park. So he suggested that him, my brother, and I split from the rest of the group for a bit, and meet up for lunch and write some stuff together after that. So here is where it gets interesting. We're walking along one of the paths, still a ton of people around, still a ton of noise. There are little gift shops and whatever lining the path, tree decorations, and suddenly I have the urge to pee. So I went by myself and found the restroom, not 15 feet away from where my dad and brother were. Because it's a water park, the restroom is kind of designed for wet people to be walking in and out of all day, so it's like concrete everywhere. Big, huge doorway with no door, but angled around a wall cleverly, so no one can look in. It was also a single building, no walls on either sides, meaning you could walk around it. The first thing that struck me as odd was that there was nobody else in the bathroom. It was slightly unnerving at that moment. I was surrounded by people, and suddenly I felt alone. I finished my business, and instead of turning to the left to leave through the door I came through, I saw to my right a mirrored version of the same entrance. Same style, no door, and angled walls, just reversed. I thought I'd see more parts of the park from the distance or whatever, and then just walk around and continue with my dad and brother. Only, instead of walking out into the water park filled with people, nobody was around. I was totally alone. I couldn't hear anybody either, and I started getting very confused. I couldn't hear anything. I also just felt in my core that I wasn't in the same place, even though the environment looked pretty much the same. I turned back and looked at the door, then walked to the right side of the building, and I couldn't see anyone from that side, and I got really nervous. I continued my way around it and looked down. What I swore was the same path I walked before, and it was empty. I mean, 0 people. I thought I got lost and went through the wrong door somewhere, so I hurried back around and through the door I exited from, back through the restroom, which was still empty, and out the other side. And waiting for me was my dad and brother, and the noisy crowd that I had been around all day. I didn't think I was gone for a very long time, or at least they didn't say anything and neither did I. In fact, I've never told anyone this story. I've never had a reason to, because it's not a ghost story or particularly chilling. It's just this bizarre thing that I've never been able to make any sense of. I come from a very small but historic town in North Georgia. The type where everyone knows each other, and it's common to see tractors on the road. It was Friday night, and we had just watched our high school football team whoop some ass. After every football game, all the students would flood the local crystals. My friends and I want to celebrate in a different way. We wanted to do something creepy. One of the guys, Chase, told us about an abandoned warehouse near the train tracks. It was old, from around the 1950s, and it would be fun to creep through it and get a good scare. We parked our cars at a church and ran off into the woods towards the warehouse. The warehouse is located between two other warehouses that are still functional and had third shift workers. There was a large "No Trespassing" sign on the property, so we kept to the shadows and darted behind trees to keep from being noticed. It added an extra sense of danger to know that we could get in trouble. We made it to the warehouse and are guided by a cell phone light. This was before smartphones, so it didn't offer too much light. We move along the rusted building, counting how many beds were made by homeless people. We were nervous that we might run into a railroad traveler that doesn't want to be disturbed. Chase then calls us over, where he has found a small tunnel that was between two walls. It was short and narrow. We would have to crawl through it if we wanted to see what was on the other end. It was a no-brainer. We had to crawl through this tunnel. It was 8 of us, 4 boys and 4 girls, and we crawled through the tunnel in a line. 2 boys in the front, 2 boys in the back, and what we found at the end of the tunnel was completely unexpected. It was a room. The only entrance to the room was the creepy tunnel. We stand up, get our phones out, and begin scanning the walls and floor. There were shackles hanging on the walls, and what looked like bloody handprints and smears on the floor and wall around them. There was a table in the middle, with gas masks, syringes, knives, and a large fish hook. It was covered in a thick layer of dust. You could tell that this room had not been disturbed in a very long time. It was still unsettling. Was this one type of torture room? Did people die in here? How long were people trapped in those shackles? And who was doing this? We were extremely creeped out, but intrigued as well, and we figured whoever did this was long gone. We were walking around and inspecting things, and I was shining my phone towards a corner behind a table, and I thought I saw what looked like someone wearing a mask standing in the corner. It was dark, and my phone wasn't offering much light. I thought my eyes were playing a trick on me, so I didn't say anything. About a minute later, one of the other girls spoke up and said that she wanted to go to the car, but didn't want to go alone. We all crawled out of the room together. The guys wanted to look around some more, and the girls left. When we got to the car, one of the girls spoke up and said, "Did anyone see the guy in the room?" And there was a unanimous yes. We had all seen the guy, but all thought it was our minds playing tricks on us in the darkness. He just stood silently in the corner and didn't say anything. I'm sure it was just a railroad traveler. He probably crawled back there so no one would bother him. Looks like we foiled his plan, if that was his plan anyway. In 2007, a few of us went investigating in Belango State Forest, a 4,000 hectare forest in New South Wales, Australia. The site of 7 murders by serial killer Ivan Millett in the 1990s. More undiscovered bodies are also believed to still be there. We were with a woman who was an alleged psychic. She led us to a remote spot where she believed some of the many murders occurred. It is approximately 2:30 a.m. We're in a dense forest kilometers away from the nearest highway, in the middle of absolutely nowhere, when we hear a large growl of some kind emerge from deep within the forest. Thing is, this growl is completely inhuman, but it's not an animal either. It's hard to describe. Practically demonic. This is when shit gets really weird. Suddenly, we see a red laser light around us, circling the trees. Mind you, we're the only people there. Well, we thought we were anyway. Suddenly, someone in the group gets the feeling it might be coming from a rifle, that someone else is in the forest with us, watching. The eeriest feeling then sinks into all of us, and after a momentary silence, where we were all kind of suspended in sheer, silent, terrorized thought, we suddenly shit ourselves, grab our stuff, and bail. We run for our cars, throw all of our stuff in, and get the hell out of there. Once on the highway, our 2 cars are travelling relatively close together, at approximately the same speed. The driver in my car, a huge, well-built man of around 6'6", suddenly slams on the brakes, pulls over, and vomits on the highway, simply out of sheer terror. After getting his shit together, we start back on the road. Our other group of friends is in the second car, and an hour ahead of us a bit on the road. The driver of this second car is a really slow driver, so we end up overtaking him. My driver friend, the 6'6" dude, starts speeding, and after a while, we are well and truly in front of them. It's around 3 a.m, and there are no other cars on the road. We haven't passed any other cars apart from our friends, who, from what we knew, were still travelling a fair few kilometres behind us. What happened next really freaked us out. Suddenly, out of nowhere, we see another car in front of us. As we get closer, we see it's our friends in the second car, who we had easily passed 15 minutes prior. Thing is, there was only one highway. Nobody had deviated from off the road, and we had passed no other cars along the way. There was no way in hell their car could have passed our car without the 4 of us seeing it. With about 8 witnesses to this story, it was definitely the strangest thing we've ever experienced. So, my house is on the biggest chunk of property in the tri-state area, and is about 108 acres, and was originally kind of a park, but wasn't supposed to be used as a park. Unfortunately, people from all over didn't get the memo that we had moved in, and therefore continued to party, hunt and fish wherever they felt like. Over the years, the problems began to go away, except for a couple. Before we talk about the perpetrators, or at least the leader, we should discuss what was behind the property. An asylum, mostly housing psychopaths, schizophrenics, and those who had suffered mental breakdowns. It isn't rare to hear random screaming for no reason coming from over there. Anyway, there were 4 men who kept coming back and hunting in the middle of the night. We let some people hunt in there on Saturday nights, but for the most part, hunting was off limit. We were never able to catch these 4 middle-aged men, who always wore masks. I mention that because the leader always wore a creative mask, an especially frightening one. Most of the time, he donned a pig mask. These men were sneaky. They were smart, and that's what made them so terrifying. I had 3 encounters with them, the first being in June of last year. A few friends and I had decided to go on an adventure through the woods, and we discovered something frightening. We found a fortress covered in beer cans with a chair at the top. Being teenagers, we decided to do the smart thing, which was to destroy all of the hunters' hard work by kicking the entire fortress down. Boy, had we messed up. We later returned to that fortress to check up on it, and that's when it got scary. It was rebuilt, almost as a shrine to the last one, and spray painted on the ground was, "Try that again. We dare you." The second encounter happened during a simple walk at night. Sometimes when I got upset, I liked to take walks through the woods. This time was at night, and it just so happened that our favourite hunters were out hunting. I was walking along minding my own business when I see the man in the pig mask, and he sees me. He now knows my face, and I hear a deep laugh as he turns his gun towards me. I have no idea what he's planning, but I booked it out of there ASAP, so that I didn't have to figure out what. This is my third encounter, and it was the most blood-curdling. It occurred only a few weeks ago, and I was walking home from my cousin's house in the dark. I had my flashlight shining, and I felt safe, but something was off. The barn lights were on. The barn lights are never on. No one ever goes in the barn. The floors are falling through, so I simply brushed it off as a technical error. But then, in the middle of the field, I saw the man with the pig mask, and he saw me, and his words have haunted my dreams since he yelled them at me. "You get the hell out of here before I make you." The way he said it, the intonation of every word, it was angry, so vicious, dead set on revenge. I haven't been in the woods since then. It was later discovered, the barn, they had been setting up shop there for some time. They haven't been found yet, and I doubt they ever will. But still, let's never meet again. In 2003, my best friend had gone missing and ended up being murdered. It was a huge news story and tore me up inside. Back when it had occurred, there were some issues going on in his personal life. I was living a couple of hours away. Anyway, my birthday was on June 15th, which was a Sunday. I was hanging out at my friend's house in the morning of Saturday, the 14th, from which I distinctly remember having a bad signal on my cell. I was hanging out at the time, and we were in front of my friend's house. I called my other friend, the one who was killed, that morning, asking him what he was doing, and that my birthday was the next day. And that night, we had planned to go to a rap concert. He said he wanted to come, but there was some trouble and that he wouldn't be able to attend. He mentioned he was with his roommate, and I told him that they could both come down. Without giving too much detail, he mentioned he was in fear of his life, and I told him to come lay low at my house, and on Monday we would drive back and go to the police. My friend, whose house I was in, chimed in, remembering me having the conversation in full. My friend, on the other end of the phone line, said he would drive down and stay over, but he never showed up. I called him on my birthday, infuriated that he never showed up, and he never answered the phone. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was very drunk, but something didn't seem right. I got a call on Monday morning from his long-distance girlfriend saying that she hadn't spoken to him since Tuesday. I told her to calm down and that I had spoken with him. Well, I got a call from his parents as well, begging me to go check his dorm room, which he had a roommate at, which they both stayed at the local university. I drove down with the friend I was getting stoned with on Saturday, and we get into his place. He had 2 baby pit bulls who looked starved when we walked in. There was dog shit everywhere, and we checked the apartment and it was a mess. I went into his room, and there we found a suitcase on the bed, half packed with folded clothes in the bag, very neatly, and this is how my friend always was with his clothing. It was a 2-3 night bag, and something was wrong. Fast forward, he was missing for a month, and then someone pushing his body was found. I won't go into detail about that bit, but I will say that the FBI ended up telling me that he had been dead for 2 or 3 days before I spoke with him. Furthermore, there was no cell phone record of the call, or so I was told. I can't say how accurate the body decomp TOD was, due to the body being in a field during the summer in a southern state's high heat. The FBI was positive of what they told me though. To this day, I know I spoke to my friend who died. My other friend, who I am still friends with now, can vouch for this. Apparently they say it isn't so, but this is definitely something that will sit with me for the rest of my life. This story happened to my friend in the summer of 2010. My friend, Emily, was running in a park about a mile from her house. Now during the day, the park is the safest place in the world, located next to a fairly busy street, with houses surrounding it. And with a tennis court and a baseball field, this park was always filled with people. Since Emily had worked that day, she decided to run around dusk, when the park was fairly empty. Although the park is literally located in a neighborhood, it is downright creepy at this time, and cops can usually be seen patrolling the area, looking for drug dealers or teens. The trail she was running is on a kind of hill in the surrounding patch of forest, and dips beside this little hill to where the baseball field is located. And she was approaching the baseball field. She noticed a man sitting on a bench. Figuring it was just someone taking a break from walking or something, she didn't really think much of it. But as she approached him, it's when things got weird. The guy was sitting there wearing a clown mask. She said it looked like Pennywise from It. This obviously struck her as creepy, so she sped up her jog to a run. A quick look over her shoulder, and she saw the guy had stood up and was now starting to chase after her. This obviously freaked her the hell out, so she just dead-on sprinted to her house. As she approached her home, her other friend Stacy had just pulled into the driveway. Emily screamed at Stacy to run into the house and call the cops. By this time, the clown creeper, though, had lost interest and was nowhere to be seen. The cops came, searched for the guy, and a report was filed. Nothing ever came of it. Emily was obviously scared out of her mind and refused to walk alone at night, and flat out avoided the park for a couple of years. Now, among our friends group, we have a kind of general consensus on who it was that chased Emily. We all figured it was this kid we knew from high school, who lives less than a block away from the park, Jim. Jim was always kind of strange, and was really into insane clown posse, and was just generally creepy, albeit a harmless individual. and we believe that his intentions would have been sinister. A couple of weeks later, I was driving back from a friend's house. The way I take to go home passes Jim's house. There's also a stop sign that causes you to literally stop in front of his house. The windows were down because it was a hot night, and I slowly creeped to a stop at the sign. As I stopped, I looked out the passenger side window towards his house, and lo and behold, no further than 5 feet away from my car is Jim, looking messed up. I mean, strung out hard on something. He looked up to me with this hazy, lost look on his face, and his mouth broke into this really strange grin. Needless to say, I hauled ass home and didn't sleep too well that night. I haven't seen or heard much about Jim since then, although I'm pretty sure he still lives in that house. Last summer, my car was in the shop for quite a while, so I had to depend on rides for friends and family to get around. One morning, my housemate woke me up, saying there was some guy at the door looking for me. I tossed on some clothes and went to see who it was. The man? I'd never met him before in my life. He made me really nervous too, because even though he seemed friendly, the fact that he knew my name and where I lived, well, I thought maybe it was a stalker customer from work, or something worse. Turns out, he insisted I take $40 from him. According to him, I had loaned him the money that night before at a nearby gas station, and as promised, he was paying me back. Only, I had not been to a gas station. In fact, at the time he said we'd met, I'd actually been at work. He looked at me like I was nuts when he said all of this, and eventually just told me, okay, well, I don't know, but you gave me your address to mail you a check. But since you live close, I just decided to pay you in cash. In the end, I took the money. Why not? Free $40. But I was sort of freaked out. Maybe this guy was a stalker, and this was just an elaborate ruse to meet me. Maybe. Then, this happened. 3 days later, I had my car again, after forever. I stopped at a nearby gas station, but paid inside because I wanted some bottled water too. There was a guy in front of me in the line, arguing with the cashier. Apparently he wanted to put $30 in gas in his truck and buy a pack of cigarettes, but his credit card kept being declined. This stranger, who looked nothing like the other stranger from a few days ago, was begging for a break. He'd leave his phone, his wallet, anything as collateral. He just needed the gas to go home really quickly and get some cash, and then he would be right back to pay. But the cashier refused. Finally, I just said, "That's like $40, right? For the gas and the cigarettes." Yep. I ended up giving him the same two $20 bills the first stranger had given me a few days earlier. He kept saying, bless you, what's your name? I'll pay you back. Where do you live? I swear I'll pay you back right away." I was so freaked out by the coincidence / strangeness of it all that I decided to break the circle. I gave him a fake name and told him he could pay me back the next day at a store I didn't work at. Was that bitchy of me? I don't know. All I know is that I felt like I had to break the loop, or else I might forevermore be meeting strangers who either needed or have $40 to give me. I never saw either of those gentlemen again. This happened when I was 16, during a huge ice storm in the Kansas City I grew up in. My boyfriend at the time had suggested that we go sledding. since school had been closed for the day, so we headed over to a hill by a highway near our school to meet up with some friends, another guy, and 3 other girls who came together. While we were sledding,
I had to walk
noticed
away.
a large panel van.
I'm not saying Mitt Romney or John McCain was the way to go, because I'm at the grassroots level. I love being a Republican and I love being a Tea Party. There's no vitriol or hate over here. There's no racism or racist people over here that I have personally came up against. I'm sure they might be closets, but they've never told me anything differently.
Now this is already starting to get...
No, the white man is that bad. No, the white man's not that bad. You can't have that mentality that the Democratic Party and the Democratic Socialists of America have towards the foundation of America. Ever since I switched parties, I've saw a big difference when it comes to the Democratic style of leadership and when it comes to the Republican style of leadership. Majority of the time, it's the 2 same faces on each side of the coin. But my side ain't spitting hatred every single day. My side isn't dividing the United States of America.
In the end,
my side loves that flag. My side loves the Constitution. My side loves the Bill of Rights.
Circled the block.
And I love my president.
Then he got out of the van.
I always said, you know, I walked away a long time ago.
To head out. And the guy sent
I just got louder and bolder. And I don't need everybody that's out there walking away. The people that are on the fence, that don't know what side they want to be on.
Consisted of the exchange. What are you doing? I was just watching you. Well, we don't like you watching us. But I do. I didn't say you didn't like it. I said that we don't like it. Well, I don't give a shit. After that, the guys walked back to the car, and the man stormed off back to his van, and drove by us, and tailgated us all the way out. It was really unnerving, and we wouldn't let our guy friend walk home. His mum had told him he was not supposed to be in anyone's car because the ice was so bad. But we figured an icy low-speed car accident would be less harmful than getting picked up by some terrifying pervert in a van. I was a total idealist back in high school. So, when choosing a college, I chose to go somewhere that none of my friends were attending, so that I could strike out on my own in finding myself sort of way. Well, I ended up making a few really close friends my first semester. I mean, these guys became like family to me in a matter of months. One day, during winter break, one of those guys, my buddy Kimbo, had gone back home to visit friends and family, and on his return trip to our college, he hit a bad patch of ice and got into a car accident and was killed. It hurt like a son of a bitch for a long time, and I still think about him all the time. But anyway, a few weeks after Kimbo's accident, me and the rest of the guys were getting back from a party off campus, and we were standing outside our dorm room building, smoking a cigarette, and I felt my phone vibrating. When I pulled it out, I saw I was getting a call from Kimbo's phone. Dumbfounded, I showed my friends the phone quickly, and then answered. When I picked up, it just went directly to his voicemail, which played the same message it always had. It never happened again, and we never really spoke about it. But for me, it was one of those someone's looking after me moments. I hadn't been doing very well after his death, but seeing his name show up on my cell phone screen one final time made me feel a whole lot better for a time, and it really helped me get out of the slump that I was in. I have no idea how his phone could have possibly called me, and I doubt I ever will. But this was one glitch in the Matrix that I'll be forever thankful for. Rest in peace, Kim, but feel free to call again. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I love listening to the sound of rain, even though it doesn't really help much when recording. I find it so relaxing. And remember that if you enjoyed today's video, please consider dropping a like and leaving a comment, as it's a really great way to help support the channel and I appreciate it tremendously. And if you'd like to do something incredible to help support the channel further, feel free to visit my Patreon. You can find a link in the description as well as the links to my social media. And if you'd like your story read on my channel, you can submit it as a text post to my Reddit page or send it to me via email. Both links can be found in the description. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.
Mortis Media.
Good evening all, and welcome. Before we get into the video, I actually want to apologize for yesterday. Yesterday's video did upload, but for reasons that I don't understand, YouTube decided it would upload less than half of it. Very strange. I actually did it twice and it just kept failing. And it was about 4 AM at this point in England, and I was exhausted and I didn't understand what was going on or how to fix it, so I just went to bed. Sorry guys. This counts as the third video for the 4th box giveaway, just so you're aware. Back to what I was going to say. Today I have the utmost pleasure of being joined by my great friend We Shouldn't Be Here on this incredibly windy night. Before the video begins though, you need to know that this month I am hosting a mega giveaway, so listen up to hear how it works. There are 7 surprise mystery boxes up for grabs, and a new box will become available every 3 days. All you need to do to enter is leave a comment and a like, press the little bell icon and be subscribed to Mortis Media. However, there is a catch. You're going to have to leave a like and a comment on each video that came out within those 3 days in order for your entry to count. And today is the final day for the 4th box, so tune in tomorrow to find out if you've won. There's also going to be a handful of consolation prizes for those of you who didn't win a box, and will only be eligible for those of you who have commented and liked on every video released in May. Not counting yesterday's one that was never published. Best of luck everyone, but for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I moved to a large new city days after I turned 21. I was naive, and I thought that people were nice and cared too much about other people's feelings. I have since learnt much better. My building was super nice and actually had a continental breakfast during the week. One of the first days I moved in, I got off the elevator to go to the breakfast lounge and did a double take at the guy passing me. As I turned around, so did he. My double take was because he was just surprisingly really tall, at least 6'6". I now understand that he probably misinterpreted this. Minutes later, he sat down at the main table near me and struck up a conversation. He seemed nice, and when he asked me for my contact information, considering he was a man in his 40s and I was merely 21, I thought of it as a friendly gesture and had no issue giving him my phone number and email. Oh yes, I was naive. The breakfast encounters continued. He was charismatic, and a little bit of a hippie, but very outgoing and friendly. I began to become uncomfortable, but worried about hurting his feelings. He told me he knew a relatively famous girl who happened to also be a very good friend of a close friend of mine. He said she was coming to a restaurant opening with him and invited me to come along. I agreed, but it turns out the girl had met him once, and they were not as close as she thought. He was a creep. However, I did not know this at the time. Needless to say, when I showed up to the restaurant opening, he told me that last minute she couldn't make it. Let me remind you, I had very recently turned 21, therefore I had not yet learnt how to pace myself drinking. I ate many staples and drank far too much champagne. Honestly, I had a good time. Since we lived in the same building, we shared a cab home. He ended up convincing me to go to a bar across the street, and I was wasted. I remember I really did not like him. However, after he somehow convinced me to go back to his apartment, and given the insane amount of booze in my system, I ended up sleeping with him. Mainly because I was too worried about hurting his feelings, and hadn't really learnt how to say no yet. I was so drunk, I hardly remember the ordeal, but I immediately rushed out after, and decided I would avoid him at any cost. I texted him the next day, and told him I was not in the position to be in a relationship, and changed the time that I would come to breakfast in order to avoid him. Except, he ended up figuring out my schedule, and would just happen to be standing outside with his friend, who smoked, whereas he did not. This would happen every single day when I got home. He would then get in the elevator with me, and continuously invite me to different things. Yoga, acupuncture. The invites did not stop, no matter how many excuses I made. I told him that I was not in the place for a relationship, and he said no, as friends. He ended up always being outside when I would leave, and I always lied to him, saying I had to go or that I was running late. If he hadn't seen me in person, he would text me inviting me to do something. When I'd ignore his texts, he would email me. One day, we got into the elevator, and he had waited for me again. But this time, he didn't get off at his floor, and rode up all the way to mine. I went in the opposite direction of my apartment, and when he tried to talk to me, I said I had to make an important call, and left. He left as well. At this point, I know I should have been more blunt. I thought the excuses would eventually give him a hint. I suppose what I should have done is tell him to leave me alone, and that he made me extremely uncomfortable. But what did I actually do? I told him that I was a victim of sexual assault and had PTSD, and really wasn't in the place to be alone with the guy. This was true. I thought he would be guilted away from the invites. Instead, he kept telling me that I needed to get over my fears and stop being a victim. I should have mentioned by now that I work as a model, and earlier, when I let him talk to me, when he'd followed me down the street leaving the apartment building, he told me that he happens to run a video production company and is working on pitching a pilot and would love to shoot some videos with me. In the beginning, I thought this would have been cool. Later, I wanted nothing to do with the idea. After 4 or 5 months of this guy constantly freaking me out, he started to dull down. Maybe because of the winter, and it being harder to wait outside. I don't know. But randomly, 7 months after initial contact, I got a random text from him that made my stomach drop. I miss seeing these sexy legs. Along with a photo he had secretly taken of my legs and feet when I was wearing a dress in the elevator. This was the push I needed to stop trying to be so nice. Before immediately ripping him a new one, I did some Google research. I wanted to see if I could find a mugshot or any arrest records. However, I did not know his last name, so instead I Googled his email address, hoping that it would lead me to his full name. What I found out told me even more. I found a database that showed me his email address was registered as the manager of a really low-budget porn website. I texted him and went off about how awful it was for him to be secretly photographing me, told him to delete my number and to never text me again. If you see me, don't make eye contact with me, don't speak to me, and do not try to apologize. We are strangers. And by the way, I know you run a porn website. He sent me back some text, saying that he only manages the website. Like that makes a difference. And then some long rant about my drug problem, because I take Wellbutrin to help manage my PTSD, and how concerned he is. I repeated for him to delete my number and never speak to me again. After a year, I moved out of the building. And 3 years later, last March, I moved into another large building only a block away from my old one. I was cautious and worried about running into him on the streets. Instead, my second day there, I'm working out in my own building's gym, and a tall man approaches me. "Excuse me, but are you Megan?" "Yes. And I'm very uncomfortable now. Please go." He told me he didn't recognize me, and I repeated, "I am very, very uncomfortable." He apologized and left, texting me later saying he didn't recognize me because I'd lost so much weight, even though I weighed the same. I couldn't believe that I had moved into his new building. I told him again to delete my number and to no longer contact me. After a few days, I received a text from him asking how I am and saying he passed me on the street. I finally did what I should have done a long time ago and sent him a long, nasty text explaining that I needed to be blunt because otherwise he obviously wouldn't get the hint. That I never wanted to be his friend, and that I will never change my mind, and that he freaks me out. He responded, saying that he knows my response is because I am a victim, and that I need to remember that he is not my attacker. This set me off. I told him, "No, it's because you are a creep. I only told you about that because of all the excuses weren't getting to you." I said how I knew he arranged his schedule back then to fit around me, and how it freaked me out, and how obsessive he was, that I severely regretted not speaking up, and that I severely regretted not speaking up, and that one incident in his apartment. He responded, of course, by telling me that he has screwed more women than 1,000 men put together. I explained that he reminded me of a time in my life that I am not proud of, and finally got him to agree to ignore me and pretend that we are complete strangers. Hopefully, He actually deleted my number this time. Who knows? So since we're strangers, I sincerely hope not to bump into you ever again.
I live in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in northeast Georgia. It's a beautiful area with hundreds of miles of national forest, some great state parks, and a ton of fantastic camping places. Unfortunately, my hometown is also relatively poor. While there are some out-of-town residents from Atlanta and other places, a lot of people where I live are really poor. I do freelance work as a technical writer, so I can do most of my work online. If I didn't have that going for me, I'd have to move somewhere else. It's just one of those small towns that will rob you of your ability to accomplish anything in life if you stay there too long. Excluding a handful of doctors and lawyers and Georgia Power Company employees, the only employment in the area is at a Walmart, fast food, and a couple of grocery stores. To the east of my town, there's a massive national forest. It's loaded with great camping sites and lots of fun, relatively unused hiking trails. I really enjoy hiking on them with my dog, but it can be a bit of an unnerving experience sometimes. It's about a 10-mile drive from town, and there's no cell phone service or homes for miles. In the past, there have been a lot of vehicle break-ins at the trailheads. The gravel parking lots at some of them glitter with bits of broken glass from what I'm guessing were car windows. Sometimes there are really shifty people hanging around these trailheads or just driving around on the Forest Service roads. These are really rough roads, and you'll see these beat-up $500 cars just barreling along roads meant for a 4x4. Some of the people you see in the cars look like the guy that got crushed by an ATM in Breaking Bad. With all that being said, it's still a great place to camp. However, you just have to be careful. A few years ago, 2 of my friends and I decided to go play paintball in the National Forest. We decided to turn the paintball expedition into a camping trip, so we could play the next morning too. After a pretty uneventful day of shooting paintballs at each other, we drive a couple of miles to one of the more popular camping spots. Unfortunately, a church group or something had taken up all the spots in the area. This was really the only camping spot that we were familiar with, and it was getting pretty late. We decided to keep on looking, so we drive for about an hour further and further into the woods. By this time, it's getting a bit dark, and we were getting a bit worried about finding a spot. We all had GPS on our smartphones, but none of us had any service. We turn off onto an unfamiliar road that isn't in very good shape. In fact, it looks like the Forest Service Rangers used a backhoe to block off the road with a mound of dirt. A broken metal barrier lay in the woods nearby. That said, it looked like 4x4 vehicles had been going over the mound, so it was pretty worn down. Our F-150 had pretty high clearance, so we decided to go over the mound. There was an old gravel road on the other side, and the road was pretty much clear of debris. We drove a few miles down this road and came across an opening next to a small creek. There were some blue tarps hanging over a plywood table nailed to a tree, which seemed kind of odd. That said, it was pretty much dark at this point, and we didn't want to keep driving around all night looking for a camping spot. We left the truck light running and we set up the tent. As we were setting up the tent, I started to notice that there was a lot of trash in the woods surrounding the site. I see a green bottle laying on the ground. I take a look at the label and see that it's a bottle of home and garden insecticide. I was really tired at the time, and I just thought that someone had been dumping their home garbage out here. None of us thought it was weird that someone would be dumping garbage in an area that is more than an hour from the nearest home. We set up camp, had some beers, and made chili from scratch. By this time, it was probably around 11 p.m. As we're eating, we notice a faint glow from the other side of a nearby hill. At first, we thought it was moonlight filtering its way through the trees. However, the angles didn't make sense. It didn't seem to be a bright light, and it wasn't moving. It was kind of like that glow you see over a bright city. We couldn't see the light source itself, though. Since there were no other access roads in the area, we decided it wasn't other campers. The hill was about a quarter mile from our campsite, so we decided to go investigate. Under normal circumstances, I know I wouldn't have done so. However, we all had a few rum and cokes in our stomachs, and two of us, Jacob and I, decided to take a look. My other friend Isaac decided to stay behind to pop some popcorn over the fire. We start walking towards the light source, and the situation gets even stranger. All the trees in the area have their bark knocked off in a circle around the trunks. We thought it could have been the work of a beaver that lived in the creek, but it seemed strange that a beaver would go all around the trees and just knock the bark off in a circle. Jacob and I start talking about the ghost beaver in pretty loud voices, probably due to being drunk. As we're almost at the top of the hill, Jacob tripped and yelled, "Oh man!" A few seconds after he yelled, the light, whatever it was, went out. We look at each other and decide that maybe we don't need to see what the light was after all. We walk back in silence and keep looking back every few seconds. We decide to turn off our flashlight and just use the moonlight to get back to the camp. When we get a couple of 100 feet from the campsite, I can see my other friend Isaac walking around the campsite. He was wearing a hooded coat, though I had not seen him wearing it before. For some reason, he's carrying his paintball gun around in his hand. That seemed a little odd. The fire had started to die down, so we couldn't see our campsite very well. At this point, we'd probably been gone for almost an hour. From the distance, it looked like Isaac was looking for something. He kept walking around the site and was peering in the tent. When we were almost back to the campsite, we saw Isaac walk up the road we came in on. We figured that he was going to go use the bathroom and didn't want to wander through the woods like us. When we got back, we sat next to the fire and waited for Isaac to return. All of a sudden, we see him lurch out of the tent. He stumbles a few feet and vomits. After we left, he had a few more rum and cokes, he said. We asked him why he kept wandering around the campsite with the paintball gun, and he gets a strange look on his face. "They're locked up in the cab of the truck. Did you unlock it?" We go and check the truck, enter the door code, and see all our paintball equipment just as we had left it before. The keys to the truck were still hidden in a magnetic fob underneath. I got a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. I ask, "Isaac, what were you doing after we left?" I was watching a movie on my phone, then I fell asleep, I guess." "But you were walking around with your paintball gun, right? Did you just change jackets?" Isaac said he had been in the tent since we left, and that he had been wearing the same unhooded fleece all night. Someone had been walking around our campsite, and it wasn't Isaac. At this point, all of us are way too drunk to drive, but we decide to go ahead and pack up and go back to my house for the night. We don't bother packing up the tent, we just fold it down with the sleeping bags and everything inside. We jump in the F-150 and I start to drive away. When we get to the dirt hump, we see something gray blocking our path. The metal barrier that had been lying in the woods earlier is now back on its stand, right on top of the hump earlier. By this point, all of us have sobered up to the situation. No one wants to get out of the car to try to move the barrier. I had a metal guard on the front of my F-150, so I drive forward slowly, tapping the metal barrier with the front of my truck. It must have just been balanced on the top, because it falls right off, and we drive over it slowly. We were terrified that it would pop one of the truck's tires as we drove over it, but it didn't. As we drive down the road, we see a vehicle following us with its lights off. It's probably 1,000 feet behind us, but we keep catching glimpses of it as the moon reflects light off of it. I start to drive as fast as I can on the Forest Service road, and the other vehicle keeps pace. It doesn't get any closer though. It just stays 1 or 2 turns behind us. We can only see it when the road straightens out. After about 45 minutes of speeding along gravel roads, we make it back to the main paved road. I start to drive everyone back to my house, but I decided to go a different way just to be safe. I didn't get pulled over for a DUI, luckily. Camping can be fun, but very rural camping can be dangerous. I've driven past that metal barrier since that time, but it's always been in place. I would never go down that road again, though. I am an avid hunter. I go every season, and I love it. I don't know if you're familiar with hunting seasons in Pennsylvania, but during late November, rifle season is in full swing. It was already the second week of the season, and I had yet to bag any deer, so I was eager to get to it early in the morning, and I did. I normally get up around 5 a.m. and drive to my hunting spot. It's private land that my grandfather owns. Him and I are the only 2 who hunt it, and the rest is posted to hunters, and the only others on the land are employed by my grandfather's farm. I had originally planned on calling my grandfather when I woke up, and asking him if he wanted to tag along, but the weather that morning was horrendous. Snow was pouring down, and the wind was really strong. I love hunting in the snow, but it almost made me decide not to go, so I knew he wouldn't want to. The roads were really bad, so it took me a bit longer to drive there. Normally the sun would be starting to rise by now. However, it was overcast and snowing. Regardless of the snow, I walked up to my spot. It was directly behind my grandfather's house, over a hill, and back up about 100 to 150 yards. Almost immediately upon sitting in my spot, I hear things moving all around me. Honestly, I didn't pay it much mind. It could be any number of things, but it was still pitch black, and the thought that it was a deer had crossed my mind. But there wasn't much I could do. It's not like I can shoot at it. So I just ignored it and continued to wait. It wasn't much long after that I began hearing something walking just over the ridge to my right. At this point, there's barely enough light to see my feet, so even if it was a deer, there was still nothing I could do. However, I couldn't tell it wasn't a deer. I just assumed it was my grandfather walking to his spot, which is just a short walk from mine. But the lights in his house were off, and if he was hunting up here, I'm sure he would let me know prior. But even if it wasn't him, it was a hunter hunting illegally. I still wanted to let him know I was here, so I turned on my flashlight and pointed it in his direction. I flashed it several times. Again, even if it was a deer, I couldn't shoot it, so I felt it was better to be safe rather than being sorry. Nothing much happened after that. After I flashed my light, the noise stopped, which was really odd. I didn't hear them turn back, so I figured they either A, sat down right there after seeing my light, which is considered extremely rude, or B, I didn't hear them walk off. I just assumed it was the later. An hour or so passes, and finally, the first sights of daylight start to shine through. It's still snowing, and the snow is falling in entire snowballs, rather than just snowflakes, so visibility is pretty limited. But I just grinned and bared it. I love snow, and even if I couldn't see any deer, I still found the weather beautiful. It was around this time that I noticed an odd-looking lump protruding out from a group of trees and shrubs atop the hill that separates me from my granddad's house. It looked like a mound of dirt. However, it was sticking out from the side of a tree, so obviously it wasn't dirt. Naturally, I raised my rifle up to take a closer look. I could tell immediately that I was looking at the side of an older-styled camouflage coat. It took a minute, but it finally clicked. That was a person over there. I just thought it was a hunter, so I didn't know what to do about it. I knew he was hunting illegally on our land, and from what I could see, he wasn't wearing anything orange, which is required of all hunters during rifle season. And I could tell just from looking that whoever this wasn't my grandfather. I sat there for a minute debating my next move, but I decided to call my granddad at the risk of blowing his hunt if that was him over there. So without taking my eyes off of this guy, I pulled out my phone and dialed his number. To my dismay, he picked up, and I told him what was going on. So he told me that he would make his way up. But I decided on my own to give the guy a good whistle to let him know that I could see him, but he didn't react at all. After a few minutes, I started to walk up to this guy. After walking a short distance, I could clearly see this guy, who was sound asleep tucked in between a shrub and a couple of trees. He obviously thought out where to lay down, as I would not ever be able to see him had his coat not stuck out. And as I thought, he had no orange on. I gave him another whistle, much louder, and he woke right up, almost instantly shuffling over to hide his exposed coat. He had a nasty, scruffy beard and a gray hat. Honestly, he had looked like a harmless old homeless man, probably in his 50s, but he had a perfect view of my grandfather's home from this spot, and I have a pretty good idea what he was planning to do once my grandfather left the house. Once this guy realized he had been caught, his face went pale. Almost instantly, he tried to feed me some bullshit that he'd gotten lost during a drive with a group of other hunters. However, the closest public game land is miles from this spot, so I knew he was lying. He just kept going on about how he was lost and how he fell asleep. He even went as far to make up some fake name on the spot. I just stood there and listened, making sure he didn't make any fishy moves. I couldn't help but think about this guy and what he could have done to my grandfather. God knows he had the chance, and that thought pissed me off enough to tell the guy to shut up. That's about the point where I saw my granddad. My granddad is a tough old bastard, so my first thought was, this idiot is going to get himself killed. Luckily, nothing happened. After he got there, we practically had to drag this guy down the road, where my grandfather called the police, and I called my dad. Technically, this guy hadn't done anything yet, so all we could charge him with was trespassing and stalking. That was about a month ago, and since then, I haven't heard anything else about him. So stalker I found sleeping, let's not meet again.
I just remembered this. It's one of those memories that isn't extremely terrifying enough to remember, but it's eerie enough to stay in your mind for a good while. I'd say I was about 13 years old when this happened. At the time, I lived in a small town, and this girl, a few years younger than me, had gone missing. It had been a big deal. They found her dead, and well, she had apparently been tortured before her death. It was a huge deal. Obviously, it made parents paranoid about who they let be around their children. So, back to my experience. My mum took me to Burger King. It was close to our apartment, and we went there these days that she was too tired to cook after working. She went to get the food, and I sat at a booth playing with the paper from the straw, and this man came up over to me. It was like he came into the building and looked around until he spotted me, then came over to where I was sitting. The guy, I didn't think he was homeless, but then again, how did I know? He had this odd smell to him, and his clothes were ripped and dirty. He kept stuffing his hands in his jeans pocket and moving them about and swaying them back and forth while standing and looking down and smiling at me. It was creepy. I just sort of smiled and said, "Hi," and hoped he would go away, and figured he couldn't do anything, because it was a very small building full of employees and my mom was just a few feet away, but she hadn't actually noticed him yet. That's when he started talking to me. I remember that he had this kind of voice that makes you feel quite gross. He just started staring at me and was talking about the girl who had just been found dead and went missing a few weeks before. It wasn't a casual topic. And he had this glint in his eye, showing his excitement about the topic. He started on about how he heard what happened to the girl, and how it was all about sex. Which, when you're very young, and some creepy man who hasn't bathed in weeks is talking to you about sex, it's just incredibly freaky and intense. The whole situation was many, many levels of messed up. And I was creeped out, and this guy was standing very close to me, like blocking my side of the booth. It was like he knew that if he didn't stand nearly pressed to my side, that I would get up and leave this charming conversation. Thankfully, before he could tell me any more about sex, or at this point ask me if I'd had sex before, which is where he was actually getting to, my mum noticed him and came over asking him what the hell he wanted and why he was talking to me. He got wide-eyed and jumped away and left. A few employees ran out after him to see who he was and what he looked like, because they were caught between wanting to call the cops and make sure to never let him into the building again. I remember being shaken up very badly. My mum was freaked out, and she had plans on buying me mace and all that sort of stuff after the incident. The thing is that after that, I was paranoid I'd run into him again. It's a small town, and shit like that does happen. I think I saw him riding a bike a few times when I was in the car with my mum, and once when I was in a shop, but that's about it. Of course, I was young and he was gross, and I was paranoid, so I doubt I'd ever see him again. They did in fact end up catching the guy who killed the little girl. It turned out it was a friend of the family's that was a bit too close to the children.
I just experienced a creepy encounter that happened about 2 hours ago, and I'm still contemplating whether or not I should call the cops. First off, you need to know that I live in a poor Eastern European country, in a big city, but in a bad neighborhood. At least that's what I've been told. I've never actually encountered any creepy individuals that would want to do me any harm. Just your usual vandals and troublemakers, but never anyone serious. I'm also still a teenager, and I live with my parents. But growing up in this environment, I consider myself to be quite street smart. It's a feature that has helped me whenever I was in trouble, and it turned out to be very useful today. It's about 3 p.m. My dad left for ping pong practice, and I knew that he'd be back by about 8 p.m. He usually goes for a beer with his friends afterwards to hang out, and coincidentally, my older brother and mom left to help one of my friends clean up the place after a New Year's party. I should have come along, but today I felt a bit sick, and I decided I should stay in. That was probably the luckiest I've ever been, and you'll find out why in a minute. All of my family leaves except me. Naturally, I've been home alone before, so that doesn't really make me uneasy at all. But knowing how crazy the world can be, I take more precaution than I used to. The evening goes just like any other. I'm rewatching some episodes of Skins, when suddenly I feel the urge to get a snack. Just behind my apartment complex, there is a very well-known supermarket, which I can always rely on whenever I'm in the mood for a snack. It's only about a 5-minute walk. I put on my coat and some flip-flops, and I'm out. It's freezing outside, and I can see the bright lights of the supermarket in the distance. but something was off. In front of the automated doors, there was a small, robust figure. As I got closer, I could distinguish his face. It was a man whose face I've seen before. I remember him countless times roaming around our block, but never thought anything of it. He was dressed poorly and was staying in front of the doors, as if he was guarding them. I asked if the supermarket was still open, and he pointed at a paper which was clipped near the schedule. It said it closed at 6 p.m. due to the holiday season. It was 6:20 p.m. I let out a sigh and wanted to turn around to go home, but he told me in an alarmed voice that there was a very close boutique next to the supermarket. I told him that I didn't need anything important and that I would come back tomorrow, but he kept on insisting and saying it's a 2-minute walk from there, all the while staring at me in a weird manner. That was the first red flag, but I found a logical explanation in my mind, thinking that maybe the man was just very eager to help me, maybe so that I'd give him some money. That sort of made sense in my mind, but I was still alert. I walked to the boutique and took whatever I could find fastest. I paid, wished the shop owner a Happy New Year, and left in a hurry. As time passed, I was getting more and more nervous for some reason. I guess it was just my gut telling me that something was off. What really made me switch was the fact that I had been gone for about 5 minutes, and as I was passing the supermarket, the guy who was usually roaming the area was nowhere to be seen. At that point, I started jogging towards my apartment, all the while trying to calm myself and imagine plausible explanations as to why the guy was not there anymore. I got to the bottom of the stairs of the front door, and in the distance, I noticed a tall, dark figure entering the elevator, and at the same time, almost planned, the automatic light switched off. I desperately ran towards the interphone and clumsily got my keys out to open the door. As I ran to the elevator, it was still running. I live on the 7th floor. I could see it go up to the 3rd, then the 4th, then the 5th, then it stopped. I let out a big sigh of relief, but was still skeptical, so I took the stairs. As I was walking up the stairs, almost laughing, I noticed that above me, the light on the 6th floor was turned on. That was a bit curious, but I kept on walking. Suddenly, I saw the light on the 7th floor turned on, and I stopped, looked above, and hoped that whoever it was would go to the 8th floor. A minute passed, which felt like hours, and the light on the 7th floor was still on. I decided to take action, so I ran all the way up to my floor, and I saw something that almost made me pass out. The tall, dark figure was kneeling at my doorknob, trying to what I presumed to be lockpick my door. In these kinds of situations, I rarely get angry. I just want whatever is going on to stop. So from afar, I shout out a very weak, "Hey!" And the guy, in an instant, turns around and stands up. I see him for a split second, and he looks terrifying. Long black trench coat, a hat, and leather gloves. He smiles at me and reveals his yellow, unkept teeth. Do you know that stomach-turning feeling when you stumble upon something that is so scarily out of this world and wrong that you can't just not look, but you want to? That was that, but amplified. I was scared out of my mind. But to my surprise, the man took off running. Before he reached the stairs, he mumbled something. He said sorry, and then he got away. I was still in shock and couldn't follow him or call the police, or even move for that matter. I easily got to the door of my apartment and noticed a pin was still stuck in there. He was definitely trying to get into my house. Who knows what he wanted to do? My parents won't be back for about 2 more hours, and I am not sure if I should tell them. or even call the police. Thinking in retrospective, I think this tall man and the man in front of the supermarket may have conducted a plan. It would have been all too convenient for him to catch me off guard like that. Either way, that's a scary thought. One thing is for certain, I will be keeping a bat in my room from now on. My story happened in 2010, around May. I live in North Carolina, and the weather that time of year is great for outdoors, because during most of the summer months, the humidity can make this place feel like hell. One weekday afternoon, my now ex-husband and I took our then almost 1-year-old to a nearby state park that was fairly small with lots of trails through the woods on cliffs overlooking a river. We would go there occasionally for hiking, but knew well enough that our 1-year-old couldn't handle walking the trails, so we planned to split up. We would take turns jogging the shorter but harder trail alone, while the other parent took our son through a small museum and surrounding area at the park. My husband went jogging first, while I hung back with our son. No problem at all. He comes back, and I leave them in the museum and start my jog. I make a few laps, since the trail is just a circle that isn't that long, and I decide to head back. As I'm starting towards the trail in the woods that leads back to the museum, my husband calls my cell phone, which was odd because we didn't talk on the phone much, especially when I'm at most a few minutes walk from him. I answer, and he has a strange, worried tone, and just says, "Are you okay?" I tell him I am, but ask why. He just says, "Could you go ahead and start back this way, please? I'll explain when you get here." I tell him I'm already walking that way, and we hang up. I mentioned that this happened on a weekday, because had it been a weekend, there would have been other people around, I'm sure. However, on this random weekday at the park, it was totally empty except for my family. Well, that's what I thought, until this point anyway. I'm walking down the trail leading to the museum, and I see a man walking towards me. That isn't odd. It's a nice day, and he's doing exactly what I'm doing. But as he gets closer, his facial expression just seems creepy and off. The trail is surrounded by woods, thick enough that if two people are passing each other, you both have to move to the side to get by. As I'm nearing this guy that I'm going to have to walk beside, he's not moving out of the center of the trail. I don't stop walking, and neither does he. And when he's about 4 feet in front of me, he proceeds to jump a bit towards me, spreading his arms out as if he's going to grab me, and making it clear I cannot get around him on the trail. Of course I stop. I don't know why I didn't run the other way. Maybe I froze. Maybe I realized that running back into the woods with this guy, possibly chasing me, could end worse than whatever was happening right now. He then says the least reassuring thing ever. "Oh, I'm not gonna hurt you," still standing feet in front of me, with arms outstretched so that I cannot get around him. In my eyes, that means you're definitely thinking about hurting me. So he and I are at a standoff for probably 2 seconds, when I remember I have pepper spray in my shorts. I pull it out and point it in his direction, and I say, "I know you're not. My husband, did you see him? He's in the museum, and I'm supposed to be there right now." I just wanted the guy to know that I wasn't alone, so someone would be looking for me soon. At this point, the guy moves over and lets me pass by. He heads into the woods while I sprint towards my husband and son, who are now standing outside the museum. I explain what just happened, and my husband is so upset because that guy is the reason he had just called me to ask me to come back. He said the guy just gave him an uncomfortable vibe, enough so that when the guy left the museum, my husband called because he didn't want me in the woods alone with him. We head towards the parking lot and see that, aside from our car, the only other vehicle is a white truck that must belong to the creepy guy. We are getting into our car to leave when creepy guy is coming out of the woods. So we watch him just get into his truck and drive away. This freaked me out even more because this man couldn't have been at the park for more than 5 minutes total. He parked, walked into and out of the museum, then down a trail for at most 2 to 3 minutes. Why? To this day, I think he was looking for someone alone to do I don't know what with. We weren't smart or quick enough to get the license plate number in case something did happen to somebody because of this guy, and hopefully nothing ever did. But I was so thankful for my husband and pepper spray that day.
This happened very recently. I'm a very skeptical person, so I usually don't get caught up talking to random people who are about to mess with me. But this scenario really caught me off guard. Everything made sense, and it really did send a shiver down my spine when I realized it. I work from home, and my sleep schedule gets pretty backwards at times. I mean, I usually find myself getting hungry in the late hours of the night. At these times, it's usually past midnight. Only a couple of places are open. One of these is a 24/7 Carl Jr.'s / Green Burrito restaurant. It's the closest 24-hour food place from my house, and I like their fried zucchini, so I find myself going over there a few times a week. Whenever I go past at 1 a.m. or so, there's always this same guy alone. Never have I gone in there late and there been a different worker. He's pretty tall. I'd estimate at least 6 feet, somewhat slim, and probably in his late 20s or early 30s. I think he's just white, but could also be Armenian or some kind of lighter Middle Eastern skin. Anyway, it was just a couple of hours ago, at 2:30 a.m., when I decided that I was going to go to the 24/7 Carl Jr.'s for some food. When I arrived, they played the usual pre-recorded promotional offer, and I said no thank you. Then the guy on the speaker asked me if I could pull up into the window. While I've never been asked this over a working speaker at any other fast food place, I didn't really think about it very much. I pulled up to the window, and before placing my order, that guy, the one that is always there alone at this time, asks me if he can just change the battery on this device really quick. I couldn't really tell what it was, but I'm guessing it had something to do with the ordering system possibly. And after a few minutes, he comes to the window and asks for my order. I order a jalapeno double cheeseburger and a side of fried zucchini. I give him my card, and after a minute or so he returns it. Now, I've ordered the exact same thing at least 20 times at this restaurant at this exact time, while the same employee was working alone. Every single other time I ordered it, he had it finished in a few minutes at most. Never did I have to wait longer than that. The first thing I noticed was that it was taking a lot longer than usual. I had probably been waiting for about 10 minutes at this point, which is double what I would usually wait, because most of this food is basically prepared anyway. Then I noticed something strange. When you looked into the window where you pay, on the right side is the indoor counter with the cash register, and on the left side is the kitchen area with a dim window allowing you to see in. A couple of minutes before I received the food, I saw the guy doing something on the far side of the room. I found it odd, as he spent a couple of minutes there, and it looked like he was messing with something small. All of the food prep stations were in the room to the left, and if he were putting something in the burger, I'd expect a lot more arm movement. This is the first thing that seemed to be quite strange to me, and this is where it gets quite weird. Like I said, I've ordered the same thing from this same guy many times in the past. As he starts approaching the window with a bag of food, I turn over and clear as day see him grab one single ranch and toss it in the bag. It wouldn't be until later that this detail becomes very creepy. I drive home, brought the food into my room and sat at my desk, and started eating as I watched shows on my computer. Beside the food, he also put in some napkins, a couple of ketchup packets, and exactly 3 ranch cups, the kind that are hard plastic cups with a plastic peel on top. I opened up the ranch cup so that I could dip the fried zucchini in it, and a little while after I finished the burger and most of the fried zucchini, there were only a couple left, but the ranch was gone, so I decided to open another. That was the moment it hit me all at once, like I was watching a good mystery show, and finally got the telling hint. The second ranch cup opened much too easily. I've eaten a good share of fast food in my life, so I've opened tons of these cups of sauces. So when the plastic seal slid right open without any resistance whatsoever, I knew something was off. And that important detail came rushing into my head. I 100%, clear as day, as the guy was approaching the window with the food, saw him grab only a single ranch and throw it into the bag. That memory was literally the first thing that came to my mind when I opened up the second cup. I quickly grabbed the third and last cup and realized I already knew what was going to happen. The plastic peeled right off, even easier than the first. Instantly, all I could think about were the details. This order, this same order I've gotten 20 times in the past that took 5 minutes at the very most every single time, took an entire 15 minutes this day. After about 10 minutes or so, I see the guy in the very back of the counter area, messing with something small for a couple of minutes. It doesn't seem like he's prepping food, because he's only making slight movements with his arms when he approaches me with the bag. I then see him grab one ranch cup and toss it in. Not only am I sure I saw this, but I am sure that he put sauces into the bag on 2 different occasions, as there was also ketchup in the bag, and even if he somehow grabbed 3 ranches when it definitely looked like one, he also didn't grab any ketchup at that time, when I was looking right at him. I know this may sound coincidental, but I can't stop thinking about it. Well, it just makes sense. Even though I saw him only throw in 1 ranch into the bag, it never surprised me when I saw 3. That's why I trust my response to opening the other 2 cups, the ones that opened way too easy. So easily, that the realization that they had already been opened hit me like a ton of bricks. If this is all possibly true, then he did open those cups, and it must have been what he was messing with on the back of the counter. Maybe that's where he was using some kind of adhesive to seal them back up. But what none of this can truly answer is what he put in my food. I didn't actually tear the seals completely off the 2 suspicious cups, so I actually taped the tops down, put them in the plastic baggie and into the fridge. I know it sounds silly, but if he really did try and put something in my food, I might be able to figure it out. Even somehow being able to tell if there's a different adhesive than the normal one used to seal those cups would literally be nearly inconclusive that they were tampered with. I'm really freaking out. I felt really strange. I honestly think he probably touched himself put it in the cups and mixed it together. I don't think I'm gonna go back and order there anymore.
I was a summer camp counselor in the summer that I turned 18. It was there that I realized I couldn't stand kids, mostly because of this encounter. I was in charge of the girls aged 11 to 14. They were difficult at the best of times, but one girl in particular was impossible to deal with. She was 12 and very quiet, withdrawn from the other kids, and never wanted to listen to anyone. One day, I took the girls back to the cabin after lunch for quiet time, and she asked to go outside. One of the other counselors volunteered to go out with her, and anyone else who wanted to go, because she knew I needed a nap. So they went, and I caught some sleep. I was awoken about 15 minutes later by the counselor, who was frantic. Katie wasn't to be found. Could I help her look? I sent 2 campers to the office to tell the director that there needed to be a lost camper alert, and we went to find Katie. Our cabin was right at the edge of the woods that covered a rather sizable hill, and I hiked the hell out of that thing, yelling for Katie. Threatening, pleading. I eventually found her sitting on a rock, and in her hand was the biggest knife I have ever seen. I calmly asked for it, and she shook her head. "I need my tools," she said firmly. I sat down next to her, keeping my eye on the knife, and I tried to have a conversation with her about her tools. She confided in me that she took this knife from her dad's hunting gear and hid it during a night hike, and that she planned to hurt the people here that she didn't like. It was so chilling to listen to her. Her voice was very calm. Her expression never changed. I asked her which people she didn't like, and she named a few campers, then looked at me dead in the eyes and said, "And you. You're always trying to talk to me. I don't like talking to you. I want you to shut up. I'm going to make you shut up." I was almost having a panic attack at that point. I don't know how, but I managed to grab her wrist that was holding the knife, and I held it above her head. I yelled for the camp director, who was searching the woods with a couple of other counselors, and she rushed over and saw me manhandling this kid, who was biting my arm, trying to get me to let go of her. I still have the scars from those bites. It was like a snake lashing out at someone. She broke skin, and my arm was seriously bleeding. We called the cops, who called the parents, and Katie was taken away. The director told me some months later that Katie was in the psych ward after threatening to bomb her school and was never allowed back to our camp. This came with a job offer, but I sure as hell wasn't going back. I am female, which isn't really that important to the story, but I like when people give some context before. I believe we were sophomores when this happened, so barely 16 in 2008. I grew up in a small, nowhere, country Midwest town. There are paved roads, so that's a plus. Where I lived was at one point the meth capital of America. So even though it's a nowhere town, it's got that blue ribbon. There was an old cemetery out on a paved country road. It had been rumored to be haunted. It also had recently been vandalized. A couple of friends, Parker and Cody, 2 very large, testosterone-filled teenagers, and I, were hanging out talking about what had happened at the cemetery, speculating who had vandalized it. I've always been fascinated by ghost stories and haunted places, and I also did a ton of community betterment projects. I wanted to see how destroyed it was to suggest to one of the 20 clubs I was in to help. I'm a chicken, so I came up with the great idea to go check it out. Because what ghost or method is going to get you when you have 2 football players with you. I might add, this all goes down somewhere between 6 to 8 p.m. in the fall. It's dark, but not late. We're walking around, being respectful, mind you. We weren't the kind of kids to be jerks. We really just wanted to see how bad the vandalism was, and to find a ghost. We were there for about 10 minutes, and we were all checking out the mausoleum when a white, 90s-looking Jeep drives by, slowing down as if to check the place out. From where we were, we could see the road from the window, but who was driving wouldn't have been able to see us, just the car. My gut is screaming by the way the Jeep slowed down. I say something to Parker and to Cody about leaving. We look out the other window to see the Jeep is turning around in a driveway/gravel road. Cody and I are already noping out and getting back in the car. Parker follows us to the car and gets all puffed up, acting like he somehow outmanned the street driver and he won't be a problem anymore. I remember seeing our faces turn to horror as once again it turns around in the nearest driveway. I'm freaking out. Parker turns the car on and is peeling out. We drive out of the cemetery onto the road passing the Jeep. I vaguely remember Parker flipping the Jeep off as we passed, which upset me because why poke the bear? What does this Jeep do? It turns around and starts to follow us. Not only us, but ride our tail and flashes brights. I'm about to start crying. I'm screaming at Parker for just not being able to leave it alone. I'm playing out all the ways I'm going to die because of this situation. Cody is giving us play-by-play of updates while staring out the back window. Parker decides to lose the Jeep. Not a great idea, but it was a straight road, just lots of hills, and when you're 16, that seems like the best option. At some point we're doing 80, trying to lose this Jeep. It's slightly falling behind, but only slightly, still flashing its headlights and being generally terrifying. We get to the main highway that runs through town. We cut right on the highway, turn left onto a house to street. We cut left again and turn into a church parking lot. Parker turns off his lights and keeps the car behind the wooden playground fence. Cody says he can see the lights on the next street over. We lost him, but wait, there's more. Parker gets the great idea to check. I'm screaming, "Have you never seen horror movies? That's how we die. Take me home." Nope. Parker drives down the street that would be running parallel with the Jeep. We don't see the Jeep, so we turn back on the main highway, and there are cop lights behind us. Parker pulls over, and the police officer asks us what we're doing. I burst into tears. I tell the officer how some crazy lunatic was chasing us, how I thought I was going to die. Cody chimes in from the back to verify that I'm telling the truth. We are pleading for him to find the crazy person, because he's probably around. He asks why we were at the cemetery. I tell him my name and plan about helping with the vandalism. In the side mirror, I see the Jeep pull behind the cop car, and I no longer have sanity. Shaking uncontrollably, tears just start running down my cheeks. I whisper, "He's there." The officer looks back and smiles. Instant dread washed over me. Way too many horrible scenarios flashed through my imagination into that second. The police officer then informs us that the Jeep driver was an off-duty police officer who thought we looked like suspicious kids. He said have a good night and walked off. That was it. They didn't push the issue, and neither did we. All three of us sat there stunned for a couple of seconds. It was terrifying, and I'm glad it wasn't a crazy lunatic. So police officer, let's not meet. This particular story takes place over the span of a year. At the time, I was probably about 8 or 9 years old, living with my mom in a small apartment and my grandmother lived in the apartment below ours. We lived in the middle of a not-so-great town, but I loved being outdoors, and I had a lot of older male cousins who lived with my grandmother on and off. They would come out and keep an eye on me, for the most part, while my mom was busy. I don't remember a lot of the details, but it was summertime, and I went next door to my cousin Leah's house to play. They let us out to play alone for some reason, which I wasn't technically allowed to do, but I figured I wasn't technically home, and that was a home rule. While we were in the alley behind our apartments, an older boy, probably about 15 to 16 years old, stumbled up to us, and I remember the immense smell of alcohol that radiated off of him. I froze in my spot. The teenager starts wobbling back and forth and starts screaming in my face, "Where's my money? I told you I needed my money. I need my money." This guy is screaming at a child some nonsense about borrowed money, and I'm absolutely terrified. I'm locked into one spot, and I'm crying. Leah comes to her senses and yanks me away by my arm, and we take off towards my grandma's house, which was safer than her own, since there really wasn't much supervision on her parents' end. The whole time, the boy just stood and stared as we ran. We tumble in the back door, crying, and relive it to my family over and over again, until my cousins decide to scope out the area. He wasn't found, and I didn't have the best description in the first place, being young and terrified. My mom even took me to a party up the alley where we had suspected he came from, but he was either hiding or had left, so I was unable to identify him. The boys come out and watch us, and Leah ends up spending the night. Cut to bedtime, and we're in the bathroom brushing our teeth and goofing off. We had a tiny bathroom, so the toilet, sink, and window were pretty much crammed into one corner. Suddenly, someone's screaming in my backyard. Because of the town and family I grew up in, we assumed it was a fight between my neighbors and my cousins, or just between my cousins. Both happened pretty frequently. But being the little gossips we were, we turned straight to the window and settled ourselves to watch. Only, it wasn't any of them. It was the drunk teenager from earlier. And he was waving something in his hand, still screaming about the non-existent borrowed money. When the light finally hit the object he had been brandishing, Leah screams that he has a gun. Immediately we drop to the ground, screaming and crying, and unable to form coherent sentences. My mom swoops in, shuts the blinds, and ushers us down to my grandma's, where everybody erupts into chaos. The whole night was spent giving statements to the police, calling uncles, and generally just trying to calm Leah and I down, because we were in absolute hysterics. He was never found, and life was fairly normal till school started. My teachers and the principal were informed of the situation beforehand, but nothing prepared me for the day, mid-4th grade year, when I walked out of elementary school to find this boy and his friends sitting across the street, where they technically weren't on school grounds. I tried to justify it. Maybe he had little siblings, or maybe he was just hanging out. But I knew in my heart he was waiting for me. I tried to walk home, but as soon as I would walk in one direction, him and the group of teenagers would match it from across the street, till I shifted directions again, and then they would follow suit. Not even a block from the school, I made an executive decision to bolt back the way that I came and tell a teacher. All hell broke loose again, and more police, but the kid was smart. When I ran, he'd taken off as well, and he was again not found. My mom started picking me up and dropping me off to school after that, so things quieted down a bit. But there were still times, in the couple-minute window, I'd be standing alone, when I would see him standing across the street, just watching. The last incident, I never even connected to the situation until years later. He had stopped showing up at my school, almost as abruptly as he had started. I eventually begged, pleaded, argued, and cried, enough for my mom to start letting me walk home with Leah again. In hindsight, it was a terrible idea, but I was a really spoiled kid. One afternoon, I split off from the group of kids that Leah and I had been walking with and headed towards the apartment. Because it was an apartment building, the entrance was set up kind of odd. The first door you entered basically just led you to a second door, which then took you to a hallway where directly to the right was my grandma's apartment door, and straight ahead